Good evening, and welcome to the Scorpio edition of Kathleen's Kaleidoscope. Scorpio is the sign that is dominating the scene no matter what today because there are so many planets in this sign, including big old Jupiter, who's been rolling through Scorpio since last November and will be rolling out on the 9th of December into its own sign of Sagittarius. But in the meantime, it is making life pretty exciting for Scorpios. So here we are, Scorpio, the sign that when someone says they're a Scorpio, people either go, or, oh, really? Because Scorpio is the sign of mystery and hidden things. And even a Scorpio who is as open and honest as can be always likes to have some little secret tucked away. So I guess you could say if you have to tell someone a secret, tell a Scorpio. They know how to keep a secret, especially their own. Anyway, Scorpio is a water sign. The second, it is also fixed. Fixed water makes ice. So think about that one. It's hard to be warm. For Scorpios are fueled by passion, but not necessarily by sentiment. So Scorpio is fixed water. It is also in both the watery triplicity and the fixed quadruplicity. It is the second of the water signs, the third of the fixed signs. Now the water sign that precedes it is Cancer. The one that follows it is Pisces. The two fixed signs that precede it are Taurus and Leo, and the one following is Aquarius. So this creates a situation where it's sometimes hard for Scorpios to get along with Taurus, Leo, and Aquarius because they're all fixed and everybody wants their own way. So that's something that Scorpio, if they need more than anything, is to learn how to be flexible, because you need to be able to cooperate when the time comes. Now, another thing about Scorpio, ruled by Pluto, the dread lord of the underworld, is that Scorpio, it's a sign of transformation, but it's not quick transformation, like Uranus comes in, tosses over the apple cart, and leaves, leaving you to pick up the apples. Scorpio would never do anything that outrageous. Scorpio, Pluto energy would just make a hole in the cart so the apples fell out one at a time. The result is still the same. The apple cart is empty, but it happened on your whole journey down the road, not just when you got to the corner and fell off the curb. So Pluto and Uranus both bring change, and interestingly enough, both of them change signs next year. So this year is really a year of learning and preparing and absorbing information, and particularly since this is the last full year that Pluto is going to be in Scorpio, its own sign. It's been there since 1983-84, and it has been slowly transforming whatever area of your life Pluto might happen to dominate. So this has been an important time, and I like to feel of it as Pluto is gathering strength in Scorpio. And when you think of the things that Scorpio rules, birth, death, sexuality, change, surrender, it's like, look at the things that have come to light. AIDS has been a big one, throwing the focus of the world on death and sex. And this has all been happening with Pluto in Scorpio. And it doesn't mean that I think when Pluto pops into Sagittarius that we're going to find a cure for it, but I do think we're going to find a better attitude. And so another thing Pluto in Scorpio has done is eat at the very foundation of a lot of religions, because Scorpio is Sagittarius' 12th house, and Sagittarius rules organized religion. Pluto has been eating away at them from the inside. I mean, look at the scandals with orphanages and priests and nuns. I mean, everything to like erode, particularly the Catholic Church, which is the big organized religion in this world. So again, Pluto into Sagittarius, I believe, will give us some ways to deal with that, but not necessarily as easily as we would like it to be. So here we are, looking at Scorpio energy. And you must think of the legend connected with Scorpio, which is the legend of Persephone. Now, Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. In fact, her Roman name, Ceres, is where we get the word cereal from. Pluto kidnapped Persephone and took her to his dark realm underground. And Demeter wept so and mourned so that she was not able to do anything with the harvest. In fact, what she did was winter. That's how the Greeks explained winter. That there was no harvest, that there was nothing growing, and that made life very difficult for them. So what happened was Demeter went to the gods, said, please, you got to make him give her back. There'll never be spring again if you don't. So he did, and a deal was made, and she had eaten 6 pomegranate seeds, which I have to tell you, made me, for my whole life, think, God, pomegranates must just be the best thing in the world, that she had to eat 6 of these seeds and stay in the dark realms for 6 months. And when I tasted one, I was some disappointed, I'll tell you. I wouldn't have eaten it, and I wouldn't have stayed down there for a pomegranate seed. It would have to have been ambrosia or something, the nectar of the gods. Anyway, that's that whole legend of Pluto. But you must remember that in the end, Persephone chose to stay with him. Yes, she had to because she'd eaten the seeds, but she also didn't make a fuss about it because there's something very seductive and dark and interesting about Pluto and a Scorpio and all of that. And I think that's something that is part of the 90s. In fact, I'm working on an article right now for Geocosmic, which is an astrology magazine, and I'm saying, at first I thought, with all the heavy Capricorn that began this decade, that Saturn was the lord of the 90s, because I really felt like it was a decade of retribution, for all our Jupiterian excesses of the 80s. But now I've come to the conclusion that Pluto is the dark hero of the 90s, because Pluto is the god of transformation. And if there's one thing I see people seeking to do everywhere, it is how to transform their lives and how to come to a different place. And that's what Pluto was all about. Anyway, I want to say a couple more things, and I'm going to, first of all, show you the Pluto drawing, which is too beautiful. The Scorpio drawing. As you know, when I had my journal, Aquarian Voices, Louise Blake from Bristol did the beautiful, beautiful drawings, and then she did them all as color. Yes, there we have it. And that's Scorpio. There sits Persephone in her dark cave, contemplating all the things that have to do with Scorpio. Scorpions, doves, eagles, and the serpent. Now, Scorpio's original sign was the phoenix, which is a remarkable bird which lived for 500 years and then immolated itself very neatly and rose whole from its own ashes. Egyptian legend said it came out of the deserts of Arabia to do that. So the ancient symbol of Scorpio is the phoenix, birth and death, to rise whole from the ashes of yourself. Now it's one of the 2 triple signs. Virgo's the other one. And we have the scorpion, the Charles Manson Scorpio, the eagle, the Richard Burton Scorpio, and the dove, the Billy Graham Scorpio. All three with a very seductive, magnetic quality, that very charismatic, but very different ways to use it. So anyway, when I had my journal, I did a lot of different things with the signs, and one of the things we looked at was Grover Cleveland used to write about the crystals, and she names red coral as being the Scorpio gem, the protective exoskeleton, that whole, and Scorpio is the warrior. And that's a very nice crystal to be connected with Scorpio, because Scorpio is dark red crystals like bloodstones and garnets and so forth. And that's one look at it. And then I would also have a look at the goddess of rebirth and transformation, who for Scorpio was the snake goddess. And also the bird. In Crete, the goddess was represented with a bird perched in her hair. And she was the queen of death, the great weaver, who wove the tapestry of our life through to the end. And then the other thing I want to look at, because I didn't have a chance to do it before I got here, and I didn't remember it on my own, was the tarot card connected with Scorpio, which, as you can well imagine, is death. As Renee calls him, death the leveler. And quoting the poem from James Shirley, most Scorpios are not afraid of death, or people with Scorpio rising or Scorpio prominent in their charts. They're not afraid of death. They look at it, and I guess it's because Scorpio rules both birth and death. Which leads me very neatly to our first guest of the evening, who is one of the ones, she has to do with birth. As a midwife, probably very well known to most of the people who are watching this show, we welcome Melissa Diaz. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, how are you doing, Kathleen?
Very well. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Well, as I said, Scorpio has to do with both birth and death. And with the birth process, since that is something that you do, I wanted to have you here because I think that one of the things that has happened to us in the past 100 years, let's say, is we've really gotten out of touch with the natural processes of life and death. So I'd like to know, what attracted you to be a midwife? Was it through your own experience or?
Well, it was a combination of a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it was partly through my own experience of having my first 2 sons in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really noticed about that, what stood out mostly for me was that my sons were not treated as well as I would have liked them to be treated when they were first born. At the moment of birth, there's an imprint that happens
Mm-hmm.
to children and to the parents. It's called bonding.
Mm-hmm.
And children were not treated as human beings. They're not treated as feeling people that have their own intelligence. And what I found was that children
Help
were
her with her
roughly
life, because that's how I see
treated,
astrology
even as
as
they
a
were being
wonderful
brought out of their
guideline.
mothers' bodies.
So
and
Sam
actually
knows
that they
she's
were
a Leo
being
with
brought
Libra
out of their
rising,
mother's
just like
body
our
instead of-
president. Pulled out, or right.
Bill
instead of their
Clinton.
mothers
That's right.
pushing
He
them
also
out
is
and
Leo with Libra
receiving
rising.
their own children into their
And
own
so
arms.
the two of you at some point will have a lot in common. Maybe you'll grow up
I
to be
wanted
president
change what was
and do the
happening,
best job
'cause I
yet.
felt that how children
Tell me, Sam, does astrology scare you
were
at all?
brought into the world
Oh,
had a lot to
no.
do with how they perceived
No,
the
because you're
world.
used to
You
it.
know?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, I was fortunate.
Read
about
enough.
it. She hears me talking
Many
on the
years
phone all
ago
the time.
to
do a chart for
So I hope
Dr.
that
Lavoyer,
in my future shows
who,
you
of
will help
course,
me
is a
look up people who
Scorpio,
are in different
right?
signs.
With like 4
and be
planets
one of
in
my
Cancer,
assistants,
which
'cause
is
I
the
need a
other
lot of them.
sign, because Cancer is the sign
So
of
I'm
the
gonna
mother
trust
and
in
the
you.
womb, although not the actual birth
Okay.
process. That's ruled by Scorpio.
That is
But I
it
thought it
for
was so
now.
interesting to see that
I will look
Dr.
forward to
Lavoyer,
seeing
who's
you
the
all
man
next
who
week
gave
at
us the
7
concept
o'clock
of
from
gentle
7 to 8
birth,
when we begin the
birthing
first of our
babies
hour
into
shows.
water and into a darker
And I
room
hope that
instead
lots
of
of
with
people
bright
will
lights
tune in,
and
as I
slapping
said.
them in
Information
chaos.
is there
And that he would
to
be
be
a
given
Scorpio, I
out.
thought was
You know,
extremely
you don't have to
apt.
know everything as
So
long as you
you
know
saw some
somebody
of the
who
same
knows where to
things.
find the
Oh, I
answers.
did.
Astrology
The other
gives
thing
you a
was
set of
that,
answers. So
women-
does numerology and the tarot and
rights
all
were
those
being
different
stripped
things
from them, and so
because
was
they
the
all
culture.
show you
agree.
a piece of
So,
yourself.
what
So
needed to
that's what
happen
I'm here
was
to
that
do
women
too.
needed to
Help
learn
us all to
about
see ourselves more clearly.
what messages they were sending to their
Till
bodies.
we meet again.
What
Mhm.
messages outside of
I
themselves
look forward to
they were
seeing
sending to
you,
their
and
bodies,
I hope
and
you
how they
enjoy
could change them
Kathleen's
in a really
Kaleidoscope.
positive way. And a lot of that had to do with my just talking to them
Mhm.
about going inside and creating a path to allow their children to come through
Mm.
and to learn to release discomfort, which is really important. That's kind of a big one.
Yes, I do
Yeah.
remember discomfort. That's a
Yes.
nice word for it.
Well, it can be, yeah, it can be excruciating or it can be discomfort.
Yes.
It has a lot to do with what messages you're sent. Most of us in this culture are raised with birth is an excruciating event, and
Right.
many women want to just be knocked out and not hear, just let me know when the baby's born, kind of thing. And they've been robbed of something very, very special.
I agree.
And one of it is their ability to see their own power as a very open and vulnerable and powerful person. Those words all go together. Very soft and gentle and strong.
Although I must admit, my perception of the moment when my daughter came out of my body was that I was going to die at that moment. You know, it
Mhm.
was such a, like, oh, this is it, I'm leaving. And instead it was the birth and thinking, and of course thinking of all my astrological stuff and trying to put it all together and think at the same time in the middle and put it, think of what it meant, but having that sensation that, it feels like you're going to die, but we wouldn't all be here if everybody died every time a child was born. And I do realize that until we had some of the more hygienic conditions or whatever, that many mothers died in childbirth. I mean, death in childbirth was perhaps more common than it was now because there was maybe not the right attitude, but also no cleansing agents or whatever. But I know that what you're saying, but you also use a hospital when it seems
If
like
there's
that's
a need for a
required.
hospital, we will go to the hospital. I mean, there are
Mm.
times where I feel I'm very grateful for a hospital. I'm not
Yes.
anti-hospital at all.
No, good.
But I do feel that normal childbirth should
It's
be
just
at
that.
home. Just like, it is normal.
Right.
It's a very natural process that
so many of us have gone through,
That's
obviously.
right.
And that it's a place where women and men need to be together in their own environment, and to create a safety net for themselves by creating a good team with their midwives or doctor, built up on trust, built up on really knowing each other well. And that one of the things that would have happened for you had you had a home birth would be that we would have spent a lot of time talking about your fears. Most complications in the 18 years that I've been practicing, to me, are caused from your diet and from fears. And this sense of I'm going to die feeling could have been brought on from your own birth, from your being born, or something you've experienced, or some kind of message you've been sent by our culture, which is pretty big.
Yes, yes.
And that may have been why you had that sensation or those thoughts and feelings. And maybe by the time you had your birth with us,
I wouldn't have felt that way.
You probably would have worked through it.
Because it's true. I mean, I feel like in healthcare in general, we are separated from ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, we're separated from our families. My mother was in the hospital a few years ago. It was terrible. I felt so out of control to do what I perceived was right. And I would think that in birth this has happened too, because, you know, I was reading a story just perhaps a couple of months ago. Not a story, it was a family tale kind of thing. I think it was in Yankee Magazine. But the woman, you know, remarked on having been born in the bed she was going to die in, and thinking this was nothing unusual then, because you were born in the family bed. I mean, my mother, who is in her late 80s, speaks about her grandmother. Grandma was the midwife. She always came, she said, and tied the baby's cord and did what had to be done, and that was the way it was. Nobody wasted a doctor on having babies, you know. I mean, it was natural. And I think it's wonderful that it's being made natural again. I guess if I had to think of this is what I wanted to ask. About how many women do you assist through the birth process in the course of a year? I mean, do you have a lot of women who choose midwifery? Is that the correct pronunciation? Yes.
Midwifery's right, yeah.
Midwifery instead of going to the hospital.
It varies from year to year, but probably anywhere between 40 to 60 a year.
So in 18 years, you've helped birth a lot of babies.
There's been a lot of babies. And now they haven't all started off in the beginning
Right.
like that. I mean, it was maybe 10 a year, something like that, and it increased and increased and increased.
So here at least once a week, and probably be building up to twice a week as more and more women take their power, more and more families take their power back.
Right.
You know, that's what I really feel it is. Yes, it is a women's birth. This happens to women, but the conception wasn't virgin birth, so everyone should be part of it. You know, the husband, the children, if they're not going to be frightened in some way. And then, as you say, you talk to them. That wouldn't happen.
That's right. Well, a lot of fathers come to us and they're fearful of birth because they've been so separated from birth.
Right.
You know, it's this, they have, just like from death, you know, nobody.
Yeah. And it must be wonderful when the baby comes.
It is.
And everybody is seeing that life. That must be wonderful for you.
One of the nice things about it is that there's a lot of hands-on.
Right.
And we have these beautiful pictures of the dad's hands and the midwife's hands and the mother reaching down, and siblings right there next to the mother, particularly little girls are right next to their moms watching every step of it, instinctively.
Right.
You know. And that whole gathering the child up into the mother's arms with everybody helping is a pretty wonderful moment.
That must be just amazing.
It is.
Just amazing.
Every time.
I bet. I bet. Well, thanks very much for coming by. You certainly have helped make it clear how important getting back to the basics is, especially with life, you know, to have the birth that women were meant to have, not with your feet up in a stirrup in a hospital with 10 people looking at you, knives poised, you know, although sometimes that is necessary to save lives, I understand, but to have a baby where you're most comfortable at home, what a gift. And the women who you give that gift to must be very appreciative.
Yep, they are.
Good. All right. Well, thank you again
You're welcome.
for being on. And now it's time for the book reviews. It seems that this month was a month in which there must have been something going on Celtic, because I kept getting all these books to review that had to do with Celtic things. And even right down to a Celtic book of horror stories, which I did not bring with me in spite of the fact that it was Halloween. But before we get to the Celtic books, I want to look at two others first. Now this is quite a book. This is called Sangoma. I don't know if anyone has heard of it, and it's by a man named James Hall. And just so everyone can see what a mysterious figure he is, I'll be sure and show the picture on the back as well. Now, James Hall entered into the spirit world of Africa, as he puts it, because he was working on Miriam Makeba's biography. Now, if you don't know who Miriam Makeba is, she is an extraordinary African singer who perhaps became best known back in the 60s for what she called the click song, because we can't say the word that I can't say. That sound to me like Ningo Twine or something, but it has all these clicks in it that she makes in her throat, because in their language, they speak with the clicks. So he was working with Miriam Makeba, and she thought that he had a very rare spiritual gift to see into the souls of people. So she encouraged him to see a traditional healer and to undergo a 2-year spiritual and physical initiation into the mysteries of psychic possession and traditional healing. And this is his account of his journey from, as he describes it, a predictable life in Los Angeles to an uncharted one in the kingdom of Swaziland. He was the co-author of Makeba, My Story, which was the story of Miriam Makeba. And I had put aside a piece I had particularly wanted to look at, in which he tells a story about going on a bus in Malabeni, which these bus rides are not like a Greyhound, I can tell you that. And they were driving along, and there was a rhinoceros asleep on the road ahead of them. The driver honked the horn, the conductors went outside to throw stones, and the rhinoceros just said, "You don't bother me, I'm sleeping here." So they said to him, "Hey, use your medicine, chase the rhino." "Me?" So I got out, he said, and he went over and he made an offer to the Lidlotis, the little gods of the road, and whatever, and he went to speak to the rhinoceros. So he said to the rhinoceros, "You're giving us the impression that in the animal kingdom good manners are a thing of the past." Stood up. So did the rhinoceros. He went aboard the bus, the rhinoceros took off, and they went on their way. So I guess if something can teach you to talk to a rhinoceros, that's great. And then there's a book on dreams, which also is sort of a Scorpio dominion, a practical self-help guide to interpretation, which I thought was wonderful. Now, some of the chapters would mean something to everyone. I mean, there's stuff like Dreams Through Time, Where Am I, Recurring Dreams, The Shadow. And what I liked is at the end of every chapter, he summarizes what's going on. She does, Linda Shepard. It's written by. Oh, I didn't even show the book. What am I doing here? Wake Up to Your Dreams with Linda Shepard. The dreams throughout time, and how the Egyptians, the Hebrews, everyone, the Romans, everyone gave a great deal of power to dreams. And then there was a good section on recurring dreams. Oh, first of all, the shadow dreams, where she speaks of the shadow is often depicted in myth and fairy tale as a creature that needs to be vanquished. And Jung called this part of the shadow. Then the recurring dreams, a dream which contains the same scenario that one has over and over again. We often wake up at the point of crisis and never resolve the situation in the dream, and sometimes they recur over many years. And she says these dreams are unique to us and must be looked at as thoroughly as possible. And then the body language dreams, wherein some of our illness comes through the dreams, and the birth and death dreams were both extremely meaningful. And I will just say what we already know, which is that in order to make room for new awareness, we must be willing to let go of old and outworn attitudes. Death is a process of transformation. And dreams about death usually mean that. And now we come to some really interesting books. The Celtic Druid's Year. We like this one. It gives us, first of all, right on the back cover, the major ritual celebrations, of which there are 8. Beginning with Imbolc in early February. It's a festival of motherhood and childbirth. Then we have the spring equinox in late March. Beltane in early May, which is one that a lot of people have heard of. It's the Feast of the New King, the festival of purification. And sometimes when they would refer to sacrifice for the crops, that would take place at Beltane. Then in midsummer, the beginning and end of the year in mid-June. Then Luganza in July to mid-August, which is the commemoration of the oak god, and the solemnization of the new king and marriage, and then the autumn equinox, and then coming soon, Samhain in early November, the festival of the swans, of mating and the royal marriage, and then the midwinter, with the Yule log and the candles, and of course the winter solstice. This is a really terrific book. This book goes through everything that you can imagine, from the Druidic functions to early Celtic society, but of terrific interest to me was, of course, if I can find it, they did a little piece on agriculture and astronomy, talking about using the stars and how they harvested by the stars, the 8 stations of the year, which I've just read to you, the 13 months of the year, which were also very interesting, because they gave them all names, like the time that we're in now, 30th of September to 27th of October, was Ivy. And then coming Samhain, which also had to do with the reed. And the time until the 22nd of December was the time of Elder. So it was 13 months and a day. And the 23rd of September was that and a day, of December rather. So that was a very powerful holiday, and probably the Celtic holiday that when the Christian missionaries came to England, decided that they should put Christmas close to, because people were already used to celebrating at that time of year. Since, as we know, Jesus Christ was not necessarily born on December 25th, but it was very handy to the solstice and the and-a-day celebrations. Then we go to the month of Birch. In January, Rowan in February, Ash in March, Alder in April, Willow in May, and Blackthorn. Whitethorn in middle May to June, Oak middle June to middle July, Holly early July to early August, Hazel from early August to early September, and Apple, and then Vine in September and back to Ivy. So I thought this was certainly a very interesting way to look at it through all the different trees, because of course the Druids were closely linked to the trees. And the book is just very interesting. It speaks a lot about how the different trees got the different names and why they were given that, and how the modern reckoning and the Celtic reckoning differed, and those were all very interesting. So this is a terrific book, this Celtic Druid's Year. I recommend it highly. It's written by a man named John King and published by, I'm sure I'll be able to tell you almost any minute. It's a Blandford book, first published in the United Kingdom and now distributed by Sterling Publishing. If you have any interest in the Celts, if you have any interest in the Druids, if you have any interest in the ancient rituals and ceremonies, this is the thing. And now, Celtic Myths and Celtic Legends by R.J. Stewart. What a beautiful book. Every Irish tale, believe me, I have the Irish fairy book too, and this is better. This is all the Celtic legends. It draws from the Welsh, from the Irish, from the Scots. And as we know, the Celts are a people with a vivid imagination and a very vivid mythology. I mean, whether you've heard about Rhiannon or Bran the Blessed rather, or any of these books, the Celtic traditions are just wonderful. And he says 2 major themes are found in Celtic mythology. One is the ever-present great goddess, whether represented by the blood-drenched Morrigo, who is also a Morrigan, the horse goddess, the shining Brigid, the foster mother of the infant Jesus, or the mysterious queen of Elfland. The second theme is that of the hero, who can be either the noble warrior or the buffoon. The paintings are beautiful, just outrageous. And there is a section here on Merlin, old and young, which I liked a lot. And I thought just had a lot to do with, I think our thoughts of Merlin as the guide of Arthur or whatever are very kind of glamorized. And he really speaks of Arthur being under a very great geas, or a will. He had to do what he had to do. He had to be Arthur's mentor and to do all those things. And this description of Merlin is a bit different than the kindly white-haired man that one might see in other books. So for all of those, you don't even have to be named Kathleen or have red hair or be Irish or any of those things to like this book. It's kind of wonderful. And this is more visual, and I don't know how we're going to do this. We're going to have to really swing with it. But this is a book called Celtic Mandalas. Now, I don't know what you know about mandalas. They're in most every culture. They are magical, symbolic images that represent an idea of the universe, and in so doing, present a physical and visual tool for meditating. They are created within the circle, which is equated with the wheel of life, the zodiac. And Celtic mandalas usually have a dual-dimensional format relating to the Celtic belief that it's possible to travel from the earthly realm to the other world. This is a book illustrated by a man named Courtney Davis, who has reconstructed the classical art of the Celts in his own beautiful and vibrant mandalas. He has many other books. He's written 18 other Celtic art source books, so forth and so on. And the text was written by a lady named Helena Patterson, who is a professional astrologer of Celtic ancestry. And one of the things that I found the most interesting in here was the fact that they drew up a Celtic horoscope. And I'm going to get the one for Scorpio and show it to you. Well, I opened right to it. Both of these pages represent the mandalas for Scorpio. And they're quite beautiful. In this one, I believe, their name for Pluto was Pwyll, the king of the underworld, Pwyll. Is that too shiny? Okay. The Lord of the Celtic underworld sits on a huge crystal throne. And as you can see, his face is completely there. His face is completely shrouded. All you can see is the shadow sitting upon the throne. There might be even no one in there, for all we know. He sits on a huge crystal throne. His face is hidden, for he is the dark initiator, who guarded the 4 treasures of the Celts, their symbols of power, a sword and a spear to defend their divine right, and the chalice and the stone to symbolize their belief in reincarnation and the immortality of the soul. And confronting this dark god was part of the process. You had to look him dead in the eye if you could find his face, right? So it's just an interesting book. I mean, we'll be going to Sagittarius next, so I'll just show you quickly the beautiful Sagittarian one and try once again to get rid of the glare. There, the beautiful Sagittarian one. It's a gorgeous book. I mean, I don't know how you feel, again, about the Celts or the mandalas, but this is, it's just extraordinary. Featherstone's Doom, the Dark Jewel, the Golden Wheel, which is, of course, their belief in the path of primal energy, Anwin. And thinking of which, if you've ever read a wonderful fantasy series called The Princes of Anwin, fabulous, and speaking all about the primal energy. In fact, in the fantasy books, they represent in Anwin is the place where the great maze is, and that part of everything that happens in life on Earth is as the Celtic gods and goddesses make their way through the maze and change the paths, so that one might come through and turn all the paths this way, and another do the same, and that's why it reflects in us that things go back and forth so. Anyway, that's it for my books. So now it's time to have another guest. And my second guest of the show is a lady named Cheryl Richards, who is going to come over here. We're going to try and get a microphone on her. And good person. You wore something that it's easy to clip on. Every now and then I forget, and I wear something that has a perfectly smooth front, so I sit here trying to figure out how I'm going to clip it on without looking very peculiar, but there you are. Well, Cheryl, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Well,
You're
this
new
is
to
great.
Vermont, all this stuff.
All of it.
Here you are.
Big time.
And Cheryl's a Sagittarius, so she has a major year coming. She moved to Vermont just in time. As I said when I was talking to Melissa, Scorpio rules both birth and death. And I was really fascinated to think about, this particular thing that I had read, where the woman spoke about she was sure she was going to die in the same bed that she'd been born in. And realizing even as we're separated from our families and from ourselves in birth, so does this occur with death. So first of all, if you could tell us just exactly what it is you do.
Who am I?
If you can. Who are you?
Certainly.
Strange woman.
I'm a strange woman.
Thank you. Okay, bye. And now on to the next.
Moving right along.
All right.
I'm a children's grief consultant and educator.
Okay.
What that means is I work with families with children that have a death occurring and also are experiencing other forms of loss and grief. And beside just the families, I also work with the professionals, the community professionals who work with these families.
So you would be working, say, with
Right.
hospice workers.
With hospice workers, with medical workers, with home care providers, daycare providers, teachers, and so on, just to educate about the grief and the loss and the dying process. Yeah.
Well, it would seem, not would seem, it's a reality that we become as separated from the death process as we have from the birth process. And I can't help but think that the family is the loser all the way along. So
Yeah,
you
indeed.
work directly with families,
Right.
but you also, so if you work with educators, do you do trainings or do you just show up with them or do you do specific trainings?
I do a lot of trainings, workshops, and seminars for adults who will be working with kids experiencing
Particularly
loss.
with kids.
Particularly kids. And then, of course, there are important adults, which are their family members. So I work with them both to help them become aware of and acknowledge their own losses and how unresolved loss will affect their own lives and their attitudes and their beliefs about the world. And then also how that affects the families that they deal with. And then how they can in turn take the information and the increased awareness and use that with the children that they deal with the parents, with the other family members, with each other, co-workers, and in their own lives.
Now, do you come in and start this out while many months, or if it's known that a person has a terminal illness, you come in, you would start to work right away?
Yeah, that would be the preferable way of doing it. As soon as, let's say it's a terminal illness, let's say cancer or something like that, as soon as the diagnosis is made, if the family members want to be working with it this soon, then we can start the whole process of how can they be of support to each other? How can they get through this as a family? How can they help their children deal with this? And open to the whole idea of this painful thing that's going to be happening.
How do you get the message across, say, to a 6-year-old that she or he may lose their mother?
For a 6-year-old, first of all, you don't want to tell them as soon as the diagnosis has
No,
been
of
made,
course.
your mommy's going to die.
No.
But you do want to help the 6-year-old understand your mommy has a very serious illness, and the doctors and the nurses are going to be doing everything they can to help her with her illness. And then tie it into the things the 6-year-olds already noticed, like, you know how your mommy's she's more tired than she used to be, and she can't take you to as many places as you used to go, and that sometimes daddy has to help out with the housework, and things along that line. For a child, if you tie it into what they can already observe,
Right, of course.
because that's how a child understands.
Yeah, because they've already seen
Right,
things happen.
Right. And they've already been able to tell that something's wrong in the family, something's
Right.
not going right.
Right.
So if you tie it into that and then help them understand as the illness progresses, that prepares more of a base for them to start building some internal resources and also helps them start learning how to reach out to others for the help they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what do you find, particularly with young children, is perhaps anger
Oh, yes.
a big thing to
definitely.
deal with?
Well, there's a lot of confusion, especially if what's going on in the home isn't talked about, or if family members, or even the people who are important to the family outside of the home, if they're not being straight with the kids about what's going on. And anger is a real natural emotion. I mean, it's one way that we kind of externalize the distress we're feeling. So a lot of times I'll work with family members to help them understand that anger in and of itself is a neutral thing. It's how we express
That's an interesting way
our
to look
anger.
at it. Right.
Right. And that anger is one of the emotions that we feel when we're losing something we really care about. And so what can we do to help ourselves when we're feeling that kind of anger? And so I'll work with the families around various ways they can help their children understand how to express it. Do I want to stamp around? Do I want to punch my arms? Do I want to sing a mad song? Do I want to pound on a pillow? Do I want to tear up bits of paper and throw them in the air? Lots of different ways that children can express their anger, and then it moves through the body instead of becoming stuck in it.
So that you're really there to encourage the family members and the people who are working with the family members to let it come out, to not create a stagnant situation where everybody's just going, oh my God, how can I keep this from happening? Because you can't do that.
Because it's happening. And to bring the family together with it. As Melissa was talking, I was really struck by the similarities between birth and death.
Oh, absolutely.
It is so, it's the same way we don't want to bring a child into the world, harsh lights, lots of people, harsh noises, and so on.
Shaking and hitting. And
we also don't want to release someone from the world in that way, and that's why it's so important, if it's right for the family, to have the family member who's dying die at home, because that way they can release life, let go of it in their own way, in their own time, surrounded by their loved ones, which is the best way for birth.
Yeah, they are very similar. I mean, that's
very similar.
That's one of the things that I was speaking about in the earlier part of the show with Pluto and Scorpio, that when Pluto moves into Sagittarius, which is a sign that makes us all stretch ourselves to the next step, that one of the things it will do is help us to say, oh yes, these are the two hands. We come in with this one and we go out with this one. And they both are attached to the body. They're both attached to us. I mean, as you read, the moment we're born, we begin to die. But I see people, particularly these days, trying everything to not die or to not, you know, and I see people saying, oh, well, they're still alive. Yeah, well, they're lying in bed with needles in them, and they can't move, and they can't do anything, and they can't talk. So what is alive? The heart's beating. Wonderful. You know, I think we have to really understand the quality of life, or what, hey, here we are. What is it all about anyway? You know, we're born, we die, what's in between? But to be able, as you say, to let go, to release, I mean, up until the advent of rest homes and homes for the elderly, everybody was always at home. I mean, the reason that my parents bought our big farmhouse was because my dad's parents and his two maiden aunts needed a place to come to, and they all passed away in that house. I can remember being freaked out as a kid, realizing that just in my family someone had died in every bedroom in that house, and then thinking, oh my God, and the house is 200 years old, and, you know, sitting entertaining myself one day thinking, well, if in every family, oh God, 15 people must have died in my room. Morbid thoughts, you know.
Well, but that is part of how a child starts to understand and get what does this mean, this life-death thing. Starts to make the connection between the continuum, which is life and death. It's a continuum of the living process.
Well,
and if we can guide them with it, you know, if we're helping them with it, if we're supporting them as they go through their various pieces of gory interest in death or fear of death or denial of it, if we're there to help them, then that helps them all the more start to fit in their own pieces.
I bet. Because we think of, and I think I said this to you on the phone, maybe the bright door and the dark door, and we always assume that the bright door is birth and the dark door is death, and it may not be that at all.
It's individual.
We may have it backwards, you know.
It's individual, absolutely.
But
for every person.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that, I hope that one of the things that truly does come with the advent of Pluto in Sagittarius is that we will begin to admit that we die. You know, like they say, all the interest in it now with movies like Defending Your Life or whatever is because the baby boomers have gone, oh, our peers are dying. What does this mean? We may die too. That there is, I think, a tremendous desire to know. I mean, Embraced by the Light was on the bestseller list for months, and a physician's book called How We Die, looking at it from the other point of view, was right behind it for many of those months. So, I mean, we really want to know how to accept this thing that happens to us all.
Right.
And me included, you know.
Right.
Sometimes
Don't we
I think
all?
I'm really okay about it. Then I think about my daughter and the people I love, and I don't want to go leave them yet. You know, so we need more education on it. So I say, my dear, keep the good work going. And
Well, I say okay.
all right,
All right.
let's have it. Well, Cheryl, thank you for being on the show. I hope your move from California proves to be the best thing you've ever done.
Feels like
That
it so
Vermont
far.
is your home and that you get to do the work that you came to do.
Thanks, Kathleen.
All right, my
All
dear.
right.
It was nice to see you. Okay, now we are to the astrological stuff and the calendar and so forth and all of those things. First of all, I want to mention that over the next month, we have on Thursday, November 3rd at 7:30 p.m., a meditation for the new moon in a Scorpio with its accompanying eclipse, remembering that an eclipse freezes a moment in time, so we want to be aware of what we're preserving. The meditation for the full moon is Wednesday, November 16th, 7:30 p.m., 28 Conant Square, Brandon. This is the full moon in Taurus and Scorpio, one of the most stressful, requiring a very calm and centered point of view. And also, on Sunday, November 27th, I'm going to be doing a workshop called A Look at 1995 from 1 to 4 p.m. And that, I hope, will be interesting because 1995 is such a dynamic year with the advent of Pluto into Sagittarius. Jupiter goes into Sagittarius this year in December, and then Uranus in April enters its own sign of Aquarius. I also just wanted to mention in November, Dante Mercurio and Nina Miller are doing a spiritual renewal retreat that you can call 453-4553 to find out about. That at the Church Street Center, there on the November 5th, there will be dances of universal peace. On the 12th, The Power of Stillness with Mariah Martin at the Ankara Center. And I also wanted to mention November 5th, at the Rutland Regional Medical Center, they're going to have a holistic health fair, I think from like 10 to 2, that I will be speaking at and also doing some readings there. So this is that's the calendar as we know it. And now on to the important stuff in our last few minutes of the show, which is all the astrological information, of which there is a great deal. Now, the Sun entered Scorpio on Sunday, October 23rd at 10:36 a.m., bringing the total of planets in Scorpio back to 4, since at this moment Mercury is retrograding backward through Libra, which it hopped back into last week. However, on November 10th, when it returns to Scorpio, there will be 5, count them, 5 planets in Scorpio, until November 2nd when the Sun pops into Sagittarius. And we still won't even be at the big Jupiter-Pluto Scorpio in Scorpio conjunction, which I know I spoke about in the Libra show and doesn't happen until the Sagittarius show, but I want to tell you, this is one of the biggest events happening this century. The last time they met in Scorpio was on Halloween of the year 1745, and this is, as they say, serious business. You don't want to mess around because this is revealing the secrets. It may be a marriage made in heaven, and then again, it may not be. Keep that in mind. Anyway, this is a time of intense dragon energy, for Scorpio is the power of the dragon. It can breathe fire or not, depending on how you personally deal with it. The power of Scorpio is dark and mysterious, moving along hidden pathways to reach its goals, so we hardly know what it's doing until it's done. Now, Mercury and Venus are both retrograde right now, and that has certainly wreaked pure havoc for the last few weeks. I mean, if you've been one of those ones whose computer didn't work, telephone answering machine broke for no reason, never could get hold of the person you were wanting to talk to, and in addition, they stopped delivering your paper, that's Mercury retrograde, and Venus as well, making you feel bad about it. Anyway, Mercury goes direct on the evening of Saturday, October 29th. We can't wait because maybe life will go back a little bit to normal. But Venus stays in its backward mode till November 23rd, still in Scorpio, where it's been since September 7th. So if you Librans and you people born in Taurus as well wonder what has happened to your life lately, it's Venus in Scorpio. If you're a Libra, of course, it's giving you energy. If you're a Taurus, it's making you wonder what you've done wrong. Because Scorpio is your opposite sign. You just have to remember that everything you do has to bounce all the way to the other end of the wall and bounce back again, and then you'll get it back. But nothing happens overnight. Mars is still in Leo. Jupiter is still in Scorpio, getting closer to Pluto every day. And Uranus and Neptune are direct in Capricorn. The next big piece of news is Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, which has been retrograde in Pisces since June, goes direct on November 9th. That is another planet that is infinitely more friendly when it's moving forward. And now for the good news, and I mean good, capital G-O-O-D. Jupiter sextiles Neptune on Friday, October 28th, linking creative energies and helping us all to deal with past matters that may be edging back into our lives. Get away, go back where you belong. On November 7th, it sextiles Uranus, which could turn out to be even more fun. The literal translation of these two getting together is, if you sense a change coming, you might as well take one giant step into it and beat it to the punch. That way there are no surprises. This is a time for recognition of all the possibilities that your life can have and be ready for them. Remembering, as I said before, Pluto is that change that drops one apple out of the cart at a time through the hole in it. And Uranus is the one that just comes and kicks it and says, how do you like me now? So Jupiter and Uranus working together, it could be terrific if you will just put on your best face and jump. You can't look before you leap, though. You have to just leap and be confident that, this wonderful thing I read a long time ago that a friend of mine found in a church that said, defined faith as when you come to the end of all the light that you've known and you have to step off into the darkness, faith is knowing that one of two things will happen. Either a step will be put beneath your feet, or you will be taught how to fly. And let me tell you, my friends, it is flight time coming these next few weeks. In the midst of it all, we have a new moon in Scorpio on November 3rd at 11 degrees. And the Sabian symbol for this, which I know you'll all like a lot, is that of a drowning man being rescued, which is how we may feel after all this watery power. However, the key word here is safety. So let's keep that in mind. No matter how you feel about what's going on in your life, there is a safety net, and you can count on it. The full moon is at 26 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio. That's on the 18th, represented by the concept of constancy and resourcefulness, stressing the fact that any reality is composed of a series of choices on the part of the individual. That's what makes our reality. Other important planetary happenings are the annual conjunction of the Sun and Jupiter on November 17th. So all of you who are celebrating a birthday that day have some year to look forward to. Hip, hip, hooray. The Sun then conjuncts Pluto on the 20th, giving those birthday-ers quite a ride as well. So other than the fact that we're all having our personal worlds shaken up in some way, just remember, the fun is just beginning. If you think November is hot, wait till December comes. Then you'll have something to talk about. And I do want to talk about that in the last few minutes of the show, because although I usually don't go through sign-by-sign breakdowns because I just don't have time for it, we do have, I think, about 5 more minutes, and so I'm going to just quickly go through the whole Jupiter, Pluto, and Scorpio. Now, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, Pluto rules Scorpio. Jupiter has been in Scorpio. Pluto is getting ready to go into Sagittarius, so it's your old mix and match. Are you having fun yet? Terrific. Jupiter is the planet of big fun. I always think of Jupiter as the spirit of Christmas present in the Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas present, with his velvet robe and his wreath and his cornucopia of goodies. And Jupiter just says, hey, here it is, come and get it. Whereas Pluto is going, no, it isn't. In fact, I moved and I'm not leaving a forwarding address. So these are two very diverse planets coming together in the sign of Scorpio. Naturally, if you're a Scorpio, have Scorpio rising, moon in Scorpio, all that stuff, you're going to take it right in the face, for better or for worse. It's meant to be good. It's meant to bring you gifts and understandings like you've never had. If you're a Sagittarius, the gifts come in your intuition. If you're a Capricorn, you can expect all sorts of things to be going on with your friendships. Positive, new friends, new people. If you are an Aquarius, look for new career opportunities. Look for good things to happen at work that come from outside circumstances. You don't even have to lift a finger. If you are a Pisces, of course, Scorpio is your house of spirituality, so you will have a lot of spiritual insights during this time. If you're an Aries, look for things from the past to finally be resolved. Now, they may have to come to light for that to do. I mean, there's some things that you may have to look dead smack in the face. But knowing that when and if you do, that will be the end of it. You can then toss it away. So it's worth the look, believe me. Taurus is, of course, Scorpio is your opposite sign. So this affects your relationships. If you're in a relationship that isn't working, you'll have the opportunity to get out of it. If you're not in a relationship, you'll have the opportunity to get one. And let me tell you, if you fall in love under this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in December, whoa, you'll never have been in love like that in your life. It's a wonderful one. If you're a Gemini, this conjunction happens in your house of health. So it can give you a lot of good information about your health to help you to take better care, particularly of yourself, or it will also bring recognition of something that may be going on that you've been just pushing behind you. Not such a good idea. Cancers, well, need I say more? Scorpio rules their solar house of love with a capital L. So with Jupiter and Pluto there, I can only say, like I did to those born in Taurus, if you aren't in love by when this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction happens, you will be by the time it's done. This is wonderful for your creativity and your emotions. Leos will have some changes in their home life, positive. You may have an addition to the family. Don't be surprised if that comes along or you hear about it come December. Whatever it is, it also increases your personal stability. Virgos are having all sorts of doors opened, new friends, new people. Step into the future. Don't stand there going, maybe yes, maybe no. I should, but what? No, just another one. Leap. Don't look. Just leap. And of course, Libras, well, it's happening in your second house, your house of money, energy, your ability to explore your talents. So if I were you, I would be playing the lottery most all the time these days, beginning particularly in the middle of November. I'd keep playing, and remember, the astrologer gets a percentage if you win. And I would be looking for new ways to explore and exploit your energy and yourself. This is a great time. So I can't wait for the Sagittarius show, because then we're really going to talk about Jupiter and Pluto, because we get to talk about Jupiter for the whole show if we want to. But in the meantime, that's my news for Scorpio. These are truly remarkable times. Be of good cheer. See the best that is in Scorpio, that ability to be the dove, that ability to be the phoenix. Don't be defeated. Rise above your defeats. If somebody trumps your ace playing cards, throw that trump on the floor and keep playing. This is a time to be optimistic, enthusiastic, and I'll see you on the Sagittarian show next month. Until then, this is Kathleen Johnson. Bye-bye.
Two panelists thought the meeting was at 7:30, even though we've spoken a number of times on the phone in the last week or two. So We're missing 2 people, and they should be arriving shortly, I hope. We were going to get together 15 minutes beforehand, so if they think it's 7:30, maybe they'll be showing up any minute. But anyway, I'll introduce them as they arrive. And my name is Susan Davidson, and I've organized this evening tonight with the help of Glenn and Frank at the Food Co-op, who've been really supportive in my efforts of wanting to get educated and then helping to educate others on this issue, which I feel is of pretty extreme importance at this point in time. I'm going to be speaking a little bit to kind of the broad social concerns. I was just telling Will Rapp at about 5 o'clock this evening, I jettisoned the idea that I could cover the science of this because I've really been trying. And for any of you who aren't familiar with it, I know a lot of you picked up handouts tonight. Today, the Rutland Herald ran an article that I wrote as their op-ed piece on page 11, and I was really happy to see that. That article was also published in the Middlebury and the Rutland Food Co-op newsletters for the month of June. And it was actually, the editorial page editor called me at work yesterday. I don't even know how he found where I worked. And he had the article in his hand and said, I really just think this is great and I want to run it tomorrow as this op-ed piece. So that was really wonderful. And so the word's gotten out that way. But that article, if you haven't read it yet, was my attempt to understand the science of this from a true layperson's point of view. I mean, you're talking about somebody who sat in all of her science classes from 7th grade on and just kept asking, but why? But why? And finally, when I began to sort of believe that there's mystery in the universe, I could stop asking that question, but that never made science any easier for me to understand. So I wrote that article as a basic, in-depth information piece, trying to really organize and cull together all of the information that I've been trying to get through on this issue and understanding its importance to our lives right now. The panelists this evening are, I think we will be joined by a 4th person. I hope Sonia makes it. But we will be, after I give kind of a brief overview of some of the things that I feel are of concern and we might want to discuss tonight, we're going to be hearing from Will Stevens, who many of you probably know. Sonia, would you take a seat up here, please? Many of you probably know Will Stevens here in the blue and black shirt as opposed to the blue shirt. Will is an organic market farmer in Shoreham, Golden Russet Farms, and a lot of people here buy their produce from Will at the co-op, whether you know it or not. Will has been organic market farming for 15 years, been very active in NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association, for about 17 years. And he also was the past president for 4 years. Oh, Susan, great. See, I knew they thought it was 7:30. Will was also the president for 4 years of the certification board for organic board certified foods here in the state. And he direct markets from his farm, also has a community supported agriculture program from the farm and markets directly to farmers markets and food co-ops. So then next we'll be hearing from Susan Smiley, who just walked in the door. Another probably familiar face to a few people in the room here. Susan lives on an organic farm in New Haven. And I've always heard of Susan that she had the best homemade yogurt that anybody had ever tasted. And she was doing that commercially. Susan buys produce worldwide for Earth's Best Baby Foods and is on a national trade association, the Organic Trade Association, GMO, Genetically Modified Organism Policy Committee. So, and Susan was one of the very first people Susan and Will Stevens and Will Rapp are some of the very first people I talked to, and I was sort of trying to find my compadres in this issue, in this realm. So, that's Susan Smiley. Sonia didn't know that she was going to be sitting up here until right now, although we've gone back and forth about this for a few moments, and Sonia Will heard me say that at 5 o'clock, and so did the audience, that at 5 o'clock today I jettisoned the thought that I could cover any of the science of this. And at that point I thought, well, when Sonia walks in, I'll just ask her if she wouldn't mind, again, we talked about this on the phone the other day, sitting up front here. So do you mind? Thank you. That was good. I met Sonia recently, and I'll tell you more about that later when we talk about what's happening in the state of Vermont. But Sonia is an 8-year former employee of DuPont, a molecular biologist who worked in their agricultural, as a scientist in their ag biotech division. And she's now pursuing her doctorate in botany at UVM, and is very active in discussing the concerns and reasons for opposition to agricultural genetic engineering as it's being sort of foisted upon us today. And then Will Rapp, down at the end of the table here. Will is the founder and president of Gardener's Supply in Burlington, Vermont. And Will, as I've been getting to know him through this issue, I see has a wide mind for philosophical concepts inside of this movement. Will, I've also found out, spent a few years in Great Britain studying with E.F. Schumacher, which is probably a familiar name to some of you, in organic agriculture and sustainable community development. So we'll be hearing from Will as well. So the format for this evening is, I'm going to try to keep my presentation really brief, and now especially that I'm not going to try to cover science, I probably can. And then we're going to turn the discussion over to the panelists, who will each give a maybe 10-minute presentation on their perspectives from their place in the field right now on this revolution that's happening in our agriculture and food supply. And then we'll open up questions from the audience for any of the panelists to address to you or amongst themselves, if we like. And then I'd like to end with telling you about some of the initiatives that are going on in the state of Vermont, and how, if you're interested in getting more involved, how you might do that. Okay, I'm sorry. So, I was asked by a few people why I hadn't invited somebody who was really pro genetic engineering to tonight's talk. And the first time I was asked that question, it really helped me formulate my answer clearly. And that has to do with the fact that the public has been left out of this discussion for a very long time. The analogy I draw right now is that we're kind of being brought in at the 7th inning on a 9-inning game. And it's really important to level the playing field right now in terms of getting some information out about what's going on and the pace at which it's happening, so that we might be able to start making some choices around whether or not we want to accept this technology wholesale as it's so far being introduced to us. There might be a time later on when it would be really appropriate to have a kind of pro versus anti debate or discussion, if you will. But at this point, I wanted to invite people from the field who are working out there and having concerns about such things as choice of seeds and seed availability, what's going on as far as labeling of foodstuffs and what kinds of foods are most affected by the genetic modification of our crops now, and so forth. That's the reason I didn't invite anybody who's particularly pro-genetic engineering to be on the panel this evening. And as I say, there might be another time for that, but not right now. We are in the midst of a revolution in our agricultural system. And it's happening at lightning speed, or as an FDA official who was recently quoted said sort of gleefully as I was reading it between the lines, I could see the smile on his face saying, it's happening at warp speed. And so I think we're at a point where we get to assess whether we're going to accept this and to what degree we are. The stated purpose, well, I'll just say, as far as I can, this is as far as I'll go with the science of it. The genetic modification of our crops has to do with, or of our plant life, and it's happening with animals as well. And to some degree, it's probably happening in the human sector, although I would choose not to even go into that investigation right now, because I think it would be, this has been dispiriting enough to some degree. But the science of it, in a nutshell, is the moving of genetic material from, the isolating of genetic material from one species and the moving of it into a completely different species. So we're crossing the species boundary. We're no longer propagating within species, but we are encouraging that between species. So, and this is happening in our agriculture system. Some of the more common examples that you'll read about right now is a tomato that's been created with a gene from a flounder to make it more frost resistant. Another one is a virus that's been directed into a soybean cell to make into the soybean plant to make the soybean impervious to a particular herbicide that is created by the same company that's developed this genetic modification technology. Another one is the directing of the soil organism Bacillus thuringiensis into a corn plant, so that the corn plant essentially exudes pesticide in every single one of its cells, and corn borers die as they eat that corn. They nibble on the corn and they die. So we're crossing species boundaries by doing this, and the growth has been, and the speed, as I've been saying, has been pretty unprecedented. 1995 was the first real commercialization, the first real commercial sort of flood into the market of GM crops. In 1996, it was estimated that 2% of all of the foods that we ate contained some degree of genetically modified ingredient. That was 1996. It's been estimated in 1998 that 60% of our foods contain genetically modified ingredients. And I read an article yesterday that said that the chemical companies that are basically at the heart of the development of this technology have it in mind that within 10 years, all of our foods will be genetically modified. They say that this is necessary in order to feed the world. And that's been, I don't live with television, but I do know that Monsanto, which is one of the chemical companies involved, has had a major PR campaign that works from the motto of food, health, hope. The implicit statement in there being, if you oppose this technology, you are against feeding the world. They're making a very moral stance in a very public relations kind of way. If it were true that these companies were developing crops to feed the world, then the seeds that they are developing would be coming with certain characteristics. They would be developing them with certain characteristics. They'd be able to grow on marginal soils. They would be able to produce high quality proteins with an increased yield without any increased need for water, chemicals, fertilizer, or machinery. They would aim to favor small farms over large, since a majority of the farms in the world are still at a subsistence level of economy. The seeds would be cheap, and they would not have restrictive licensing fees. And they would be seeds for crops that would feed people, not for crops that would feed animals. The genetically engineered crops that are now available have really different characteristics. They need to be grown on high-quality soils. They usually require a new investment in machinery that allows for something called over-the-top of the crop spraying. And they basically involve an increased use of chemicals. Even though the stated idea is to decrease the use of pesticides and herbicides, actually the herbicide and pesticide use is their finding is increasing in many of the fields where genetically modified seed is being grown. A lot of the produce crop is being grown to feed animals for livestock and not protein for people. But of the greatest concern is the fact that 2/3 of all of the seed that has so far been genetically engineered has been created to resist what are called target herbicides or pesticides. So the seed is created by a particular company so that that crop will be able to resist that company's herbicide or pesticide. So that when the farmer buys the seed, the farmer also buys the herbicide or pesticide from that company. And the seed, in essence, thrives in a chemical environment. Everything else will die, but that particular crop will thrive. And this is where the chemical companies are more or less having gene wars amongst themselves. I shouldn't use the word chemical companies without just making note of the fact that this is going on at the level of names, corporate names that might be familiar to some of you. Monsanto, DuPont, Dow Chemicals, Novartis, a company called AgroEvo. There's a few others that are really involved in kind of jockeying for #1 position here. And they have all created what they call life science divisions. And those are their agriculture divisions with such PR campaigns as food, health, and hope. So they have their chemical divisions, and then they have their life science divisions. So they sell you the seed, and they sell you the pesticide to go with it. And a lot of the pesticide, because the plant is has been designed to withstand the pesticide can be sprayed over the top of the crop, not at the base of the crop. So you use more pesticide by spraying it over the top of the crop. There are also, in some cases, farmers are signing contracts that state that they will also not save their seed for next year's planting, but will come back to the same company for seed for next year's planting. And in some cases, they're also charging what they call per acre technology fees to recoup their research and development in this field. So those are some of the stated purpose versus the apparent purpose of what's going on here. If I could say it in my words from a very base level, I would say that what's going on is this is the strategy at the heart of an industry-wide war, the aim of which is to basically take control of the world's food supply. These are multinational companies. I might be really radical in saying that, but that's what I thought from the very beginning. And I got really depressed when I first heard about all this. And I spent about 5 days being really depressed. And then I realized that that was not an option for the long term. And that's why I started writing and started speaking, and that's why I'm here tonight, and I hope that's why you're here tonight. And my other motto inside of all this is to sort of combat food, health, hope. My motto is don't get depressed, get educated, and then get vocal. So I just want to go over a few of the levels of concern that people have raised in this whole issue. A lot of people, the emissaries for some emissaries in the agricultural divisions of our government have been very aggressively promoting these crops for the last 4 or 5 years, both in stateside and overseas. They often characterize these emissaries, like the Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, and others, often characterize people who question agricultural biotechnology as emotional and uninformed. So I just want to let you know that might be levied against you. And the one thing I want to ask in response to that is there anything wrong with being passionate about something that is so primary as food or clean water? If we can't be emotional about that and speak from an emotional place and be informed, then there's really no point for debate. We're just going to have to sort of stand in our own camps. There is passion, and passion does not make a response any less valid, as far as I can tell. But a lot of the argument about people being emotional is aimed at people who are simply concerned or revulsed to some degree about the whole idea of the sundering of natural barriers and what that because that's essentially what's going on in the crossing of genes between species. There's a species integrity that is genetic structure, and genetic structure is being willfully manipulated in this sense. And people who are simply opposed to that are opposed to that, and it may be that that might be their only point of opposition, but there are a number of religious groups that are very concerned about this, because just at the level of the foods they eat, they need to know that what they're eating is kosher. And I'm not just talking about kosher Jews. You know, there are a number of groups of people who feel that way. Then there's the whole idea of monopoly, which I think I just touched on, and the concerns about the sovereignty of the farmer. If the farmer, I mean, we're basically moving into a system with this where we're beginning to develop a model of contract farming, where farmers are essentially renting seed and then selling back crops with a specific trait, a specific market trait. What that does, that has the potential of, first of all, really blocking out of the market any farmers who decide to block this technology, who decide that they don't want to grow genetically modified seed. If everything goes towards centralization and there's no place for a market in the wider sense for people who aren't growing as contract farmers, then we've kind of gone wholesale to the renting of seed and the selling back of crop with certain market traits. And then, if it's also true that a farmer needs to contract for a specific pesticide, what's essentially happening is we're creating a situation where we are taking away a degree of decision-making power. Yet, if the crop fails, it's still the farmer's responsibility. It's still the farmer's fault. It's not the corporation's fault. So that's of concern. Then there are environmental health concerns, which this gets into the science, which Sonia can talk to so much better, but I'll just say that, like, as far as the Bt corn goes, there's a real concern that it's going to be developing super hardy weeds and insects that will require ever more stronger pesticides and herbicides to take care of them. Just think about what's happened in the human food chain with the introduction of antibiotics. It's a really similar parallel there, you know? I mean, I'm not affected by antibiotics. They have to give me the strongest antibiotics they can to fight an infection because I've been given so many, or have probably also ingested so many through the course of eating foods. So I'm one of those people who really, it's a risk to get that sick. And then there are personal health concerns. And the personal health concerns are the personal health concerns are a really big discussion. And now I'm going to try to just do it in about 2 minutes here, and hopefully with questions that come up from the audience, we'll be able to address some of our panelists as well. There's a lawsuit against the FDA right now that's been brought by a group called the Alliance for Biointegrity. It's a very interesting alliance of scientists, religion leaders, and public interest groups. The reason they've come together is because of a concern about freedom of expression for people who, as I was speaking before, really need to know from their religious standpoint of religious practice what it is they're eating. And also from the standpoint of insisting that these foods be, that the FDA has already acted, the Food and Drug Administration has already acted out of line in not demanding mandatory safety tests. There's a very large, very major consumer outcry going on in Europe right now, and Europe has effectively blocked the approval of any new genetically modified organisms coming into the European borders until there's a whole legal gesture going on about the possibility of more intense review processes. And you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks and months because the U.S. will likely be waging a trade war against Europe because of the blocking of these organisms. But what's happening is now that the conversation is starting to really build here in America and people are paying attention to it, I'm sure some of you know that there was a 2-part segment that Dan Rather hosted recently on GM foods, and ABC did a piece 2 nights ago on this, and our Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, got up on ABC and said the exact same thing that he said 2 weeks ago in front of the National Press Club, which was, well, I can understand the outcry in Europe. They have food scares there. And the reason we don't have food scares here in the United States is because we have these regulatory agencies making sure our food is safe. Exactly. There are 80 million cases a year now of food poisoning in America, but they're just not called food scares because they're not gathered under one rubric of a particular scare. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, otherwise known as the FDA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the United States Department of Agriculture are all mandated to regulate genetic modification in our agriculture system. And they have also, for about 15 years now, been mandated to foster the growth of the industry basically by the successive presidential regimes. So it started with Reagan-Bush, which was a strong deregulation era. That's what a lot of this science and exploration was starting to really get developed. And then it was continued during the Bush era under a 1986 framework for regulation, coordinated framework for regulation of biotechnology. And since then, these agencies are basically working on the premise that the products of this technology don't differ fundamentally from the products of traditional breeding practices. So in essence, they leave the concern of safety up to the companies that are developing the food. So if the company feels that there's a concern for the safety of a particular food, they're supposed to warn the FDA, and then they can have a kind of a soiree together. I forget what it's called. No, but it's like this. It's not mandatory in any way. If the corporation deems that there's a cause for concern, then they can have a conference with the FDA. But none of the foods are actually go through a long-term rigorous testing on the part of our regulating agencies. So to combat that, and so here we've been hearing that the FDA, the scientists are all in agreement and et cetera, et cetera. Well, as a result of this lawsuit, 44,000 pages of interagency documents were ordered to be handed over to the plaintiffs. And they found that there was great dissension among the scientists within the FDA about the safety of these foods. And but the FDA came forward with a statement of uniform agreement that there were no safety concerns and that it was no problem working under the idea that the products of recombinant DNA technology were not different from the products of traditional breeding practices. Just to give you just to counterbalance that, I just want to say that there are many noted experts and scientists in the field who heartily disagree with that statement by the FDA. And there were a group of 25 scientists that included the director of the Max Planck Institute and president of the Association of German Scientists, a professor of medical microbiology at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom, and a professor emeritus in the Department of Molecular and Cell Biology at University of California, Berkeley. And their report, which was called The Need for Greater Regulation and Control of Genetic Engineering, stated in part, with genetic engineering, familiar foods could become metabolically dangerous or even toxic. Even if the transgene, the gene that comes in, is not dangerous or toxic, it could upset complex biochemical networks and create new bioactive compounds or change the concentration of those normally present. In addition, the properties of proteins may change in this new chemical environment. Further, the potential toxic or carcinogenic effects could have substantial latency periods. Only rigorous long-term tests can screen for such problems. That's not the only group, but that's a group of 25 very prominent scientists who've made that statement, completely independent and obviously not in agreement with the FDA. So that's personal health issues. And then finally, we come to just the whole issue of choice and the right to know. 60% of our foods already have genetically modified ingredients in them. What happens when we get close to 80 and 85 and 90%? Where is our ability to make an informed decision about what we want to put into our bodies or what we want to feed our families or our children? It's a really big concern. And so along with that goes the right to know, which again is under the framework of the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration is the administration that deems when it's important. They have the consumer right to know law. So when they deem that an additive or a food substance will significantly change the food itself, that's when they need to put it on the label. But because they're working under the idea that the processes of this genetic engineering technology is no different from traditional breeding practices, and I'm hoping that Sonia will tell us a little bit about how it is. It's covered also in that paper that I wrote. But because they've decided that there is no difference between the two, traditional and recombinant DNA technology, then there's no need for the consumer to know that that's the manner in which their food has been produced. So the consumer's right to know does not apply. And I think there's probably a few people in this room, I would imagine, who don't agree. And I know that I'm one of them, and that's one of the reasons why I felt like it was so important to start finding out what this is all about. So don't get depressed, get educated, get vocal. And at the end of the evening, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the state of Vermont. But right now, also in the state of Vermont, our compadres here, or I should say my compadres, people I've been able to talk to about this issue, are here to talk to us and then also take questions from anybody who has any specifics that they want to address up here. So we'll turn it over to Will Stevens.
Maybe I'll just stand up. Thank you, Susan, and thank you everyone for coming. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some less familiar. Yeah, actually, first thing I have to deal with is the hat. My kids did insist that I bring this, but I was also raised in a household that said you should never wear hats indoors, so I will put it up here. For those of you who can't see, we've got the old farmers are good guys. I save this for special occasions. There it is. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin. So I guess I'll just start that way.
What you know.
Yeah, well, you've touched on a lot of those things. But I'm going to start with paraphrasing a slogan from the 70s that some of you may remember. The question is, if transgenic crops are the answer, what's the question? And I guess my next comment is, are transgenics meant to solve the problems of monoculture-based agriculture? The inability of America's farmers to reduce their debt and earn a decent living? Are they addressing decreasing yields, unsafe and unstable food supply, or what? I don't know. Maybe none of the above. I'm much more comfortable answering questions, so I'm going to keep this real short. All right, and turn it over to the other panelists, and then I'm happy to answer the questions and then ramble on. But in a nutshell, why I'm concerned about transgenic seeds. Right up front, as an organic grower, I'm going to lose some of the tools that I'm using now, BT being one of them. If BT is in the food, I don't have to spray for it, but resistance will build up that much quicker. And for those who don't quite understand how that works, when I spray BT, The only caterpillars that will be affected by that are those that actually ingest the product on the treated leaf. And when it's in the plant, it's the same process. They'll ingest a bit of the plant and they'll die. But now there's going to be some insects that aren't going to ingest it. So that's why I have to keep spraying the product or rotate my fields so that the pest populations don't build up. There are other strategies I can use as an organic grower to get around the pest problems. And spraying is just one tool I use. With transgenic Bt vegetables, I won't be able to spray anymore. I won't be able to use this rather benign product. So which means I'll have to go in with something more general, such as rotenone or a pyrethrum product, which kills more insects. Another reason I worry, centralization of the seed supply, which is already happening. I brought a few little things I won't bore you with, but in a recent Wall Street Journal article, it reported a Mexican seed company owns 40% of all the vegetables sold in this country. Let me back up. 40% of all vegetables sold in this country come from this one seed company. And that's not Novartis and it's not Monsanto. It's another company that works with those larger corporations. I've noticed it as a grower over the years, even with certain hybrids, that the large seed houses feel as though the market for certain things, such as Rondino carrots, just isn't big enough to justify continuing the hybridization process, so they yank them. And as transgenic crops become more and more available and more pervasive, let me say, I have a hunch that some of these other things that those of us who identified regional varieties that do well for us in the Northeast, let's say, just won't be available anymore. Another reason I worry is a more philosophical one. Continued erosion of our abilities as individuals and as a society to control our destinies, to be independent, to make informed decisions, to not just be told what to do and what to accept, and to live in a system that's beyond our ability to affect. And that's a big one for me, and I'd be happy to get into that more later. Another basic one, lack of knowledge about the potentially synergistic effects of these two life forms that are coming together. And not only that, but how that will be expressed in the bigger world of once you've ingested it, then what? And you've talked about antibiotics. That was the example I was going to use as well. We have no idea how this will manifest itself later. And then, of course, the loss of biodiversity. Anyway, where do I go? Yeah, I think basically a lot of things started. A friend of mine this afternoon stated that he feels as though this is the ultimate, this is the culmination of the Plant Variety Protection Act that was passed in the 1970s, which allowed corporations, businesses, individuals, research facilities to patent varieties of life forms. And he feels as though this is kind of the ultimate result of that. Because, as Susan said, now I can't legally, anything that's labeled PVP or plant variety protected, I can't save the seed for without the risk of the hybrid police or the patent police coming in. And they have ways of knowing. There are marker genes as well that are in these things that they can come and they can do a field test and say, this is ours. This is our Roundup Ready soybean here you're growing illegally. And so that's just a wonderful thing for a farmer to have to deal with. I think back to 10,000 years ago when the first hunters and gatherers were starting to learn about agriculture, and basically, they noticed that, some seeds, could, in a little bit of scratched earth would grow, and so let's put a few aside, and that's kind of where all this started. And is this the ultimate? It's hard to say. I'd rather think not. Terminator technology, of course, is just one more step. And again, for those who don't know, that's a technology that's been developed whereby the seed is self-sterile, effectively. Let's just say I have some Terminator wheat, and I go to combine the wheat, and I want to plant it the following year. It just won't grow, because there's a gene within that causes it to maybe you can talk more to this, but it ultimately self-destructs. I'm sorry?
You're doing great.
Thank you. I avoided science like a plague at school. So, all right. Okay. It's another green. We're on the threshold of another green revolution, which I think wasn't quite successful in the 50s and 60s. Some of the the great example I like to tell about is rice. One size fits all. They had rice that was this perfect thing, big heads, short stalks, and so forth. But what they found is that when they started planting it in various regions, that either it was too short for wet culture, too tall for dry culture, too heavy, it would lodge with the winds. The yields were so great that where in some areas that the farmers couldn't get it to market because they only had ox carts or their backs, and they couldn't have enough labor to get it, so they had to improve the roads to get the trucks in, which meant fossil fuels. And so here we go, and this is the green revolution. So you see that we're talking systems again. We're talking systems, and what might have worked in a region or an area, just it can't take one size fits all. And this is another, in my mind, this is the same thing, only round 2, 3, fill in the number. Environmentally, we're just beginning to see some of the fallout from the use of transgenics. Everybody's probably familiar with the monarch butterfly story. The drifting corn pollen that has Bt on it. As I said before, Bt, the little worm, any Lepidoptera eats a little bit of the leaf and they die, and monarch has, one of its stages is a caterpillar stage, and they eat weeds along the margin of these cornfields, and they don't make it down to Mexico, where they belong in the winter. That was in the latest Nature magazine. Washing will not be an option. People remember Alar and Meryl Streep scrubbing those apples and so forth. You can't do that with transgenic food. Labeling. I can't stand here before you as a grower right now and tell you that everything I'm growing isn't genetically altered. I cannot do that. I'd like to be able to. I can't do it. If the catalogs, seed catalogs that I use mention it, then it's there for me. If they choose not to mention it, I don't know. I talked to a seed house just the other day. They didn't know of any plans to require labeling of vegetable seeds, and nor are they doing it themselves, although they aren't selling genetically transgenic seeds. There we are. I also stand before you not just as a farmer, but as a consumer. And I think that sometimes growers in particular forget this. And I think sometimes consumers forget this too, that we are kind of in this whole, ball of wax together. And, I'm here because I feel that information is very important, and that if I can talk about some of my concerns to those of you who are eating my produce, then I think that we can work together and try to come to some grips or understanding of this problem, and maybe together you can help me continue to make a living at this. What I like to do. I finally this year took something that Trevor Gross said and kind of applied it to my situation, where I'm kind of a facilitator, where I'm taking the sun's energy and I'm transferring it into nutrition for all of us here. And I'm happy to play that role, but yet there are these other forces at work that aren't really helping me. And so ultimately I rely on you, or the end user, and to be a part of my community, for me to be a part of your community, so we can get around this somehow, take it out of their hands and put it back into our hands. I don't like being on the defensive. This transgenic thing, as you touched upon, kind of puts the farmers kind of right out there again for the consumers to say, boy, that Alar's terrible stuff, or that, this unpasteurized apple cider is terrible, and so on and so forth. And it's always the grower that seems to get it. But it's not always the grower. You have to understand that the grower is using, in many cases, the grower is using the best information they have available to them. Oftentimes, unfortunately, in some ways, it comes from extension. Extension is funded sometimes by research money from the Monsantos, the corporations of the world, so forth. So where's this information stream? It's all generated up here again somewhere. You know, frankly, we got started back in 81 by going around, actually we got started in 81, but prior to that we went to a lot of NOFA workshops, you know, and went visited farms and asked questions and saw how people did things. And so we took that information and tried to adapt it and get started on our own. I won't say we didn't ask questions from Extension as well, but as Will mentioned earlier to me, that we are kind of a little unique here in Vermont. You know, we're not in the Midwest where basically everything has to do with, you know, this seed rep, seed sales rep that gives you the information, or the Extension person or the university person who's basically parroting the same thing. I would like to say just a quick word of advice that one way of getting around this is to grow your own, obviously. You know, if you can find your seeds, seed sources, you know, you can grow your own. Everybody should garden. I don't care if it's flowers or vegetables or what. Everybody should have some sort of garden. If you can't do that, find somebody you trust who's going to do it for you. You know, and if you can't do that, then find a store, you know, who can do that for you, and then patronize them. You know, go and buy the stuff there. I think that. Yeah, you were mentioning Monsanto's latest slogan. I remember back in the 70s, Monsanto had a slogan, chemicals, without them, life itself would be impossible. That was really disingenuous. You know, I mean, our slogan is, you know, we sell the best and compost the rest. I gotta go to slogan. So, at any rate, let's see. Where are we here? Yeah, we've got a system, and again, I'll talk about this later, but the system that we're operating under now is basically a system that deals with a lot of mistrust. You know, that's why we need the regulators, that's why we need the attorneys, and so forth, is because we're not allowed to trust each other. You know, there's no money in it. You know, I think that if everybody starts, like I say, if you start gardening on your own, or if you start kind of looking for ways to take on some of your own, taking back some of the responsibility that you're giving up to, you know, corporations, to the government, whatever. I think that technocrats, let's say, you know, we can go a long way towards just kind of reclaiming, you know, what's important in our lives. And health is what's important. You know, let's understand the relationship we have with food. Just a quick couple more comments. I heard on the way in today, you were talking about the U.S.'s position in the world and so forth. Well, we just slapped 100% tariff on French food today in retaliation for their ban on our hormone-fed beef. Here we go. Most of the cotton grown in this country is now transgenic. A lot of the corn is. I guess the latest figure I heard was 70 million acres, something like that. Where's all this food going to go? Well, we're looking for export, folks. We're looking for export. Now, Europe doesn't want it. How do you think we're going to get them to take it? 100% tariff on French food? That's a place to start. You know, this is our MO. This is how we're going to handle this situation, politically in this country. I think we should be aware of that. The other thing I just want to say is this is the American Vegetable Grower magazine from February of 1999. And on the cover it says, "Get ready for herbicide-tolerant vegetables." And the article, the cover story, deals with a Roundup-ready lettuce, which they think that once it jumps all the regulatory hurdles, will be ready for the field in the year 2003. What Susan was talking about isn't all pie in the sky stuff. There's BT corn being raised in Addison County in Moncton right now. These companies are working on this glyphosate-tolerant lettuce, so that growers can now save their labor costs by spraying their fields with Roundup, planting their lettuce. It's a wonderful thing. And I guess my question to you, to ponder at least, or to leave here with, is just, you know, do we need this stuff?
I'd rather sit.
Can you see if everybody can hear you? Yeah.
Well, we've been hearing snippets of news about GM crops for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, and despite the fact that especially in the organic field that I work in and have lived in, the reaction almost from the beginning was almost uniformly negative. I kept thinking that there might be some positive aspects to it that would manifest themselves after a while. I thought that genetic modification would see an acceleration of some of the very good work that's been done in agriculture using traditional breeding methods, and that we would find that genetic would result in more plants that were disease resistant, or just other ideas that would save on the number of pounds of herbicides and pesticides that would be used on traditional crops. But that hasn't been happening, and you read more and more articles about as more and more studies get done by people who are interested in doing the research that the drug companies didn't do, that some of the most important bugs in a farmer's repertoire in a farmer's repertoire, such as ladybugs and lacewings and butterflies, are all being damaged. Their mortality is increasing and their fertility is decreasing, and they're all being damaged by exposure to these types of crops. But the area of this whole question that I know or have worked on the most is within the organic industry, which or the organic growing and making of foods and selling of foods to people. This sort of seems to be yet another threat to it, and a lot of people who grow organic crops and sell organic food have been trying to develop policies. They're trying to think about what to do as a category of food growing in response to these crops, and the industry just established a policy almost reflexively 3 years ago that no organic food would have genetically modified components to it. The farmers wouldn't grow genetically modified crops, and that processed food products wouldn't have any genetically modified parts to them. But having said that reflexively, when people started to think about what that really meant, it began to be apparent that it wasn't going to be that simple to achieve that goal. The main food, while there is a whole raft of vegetables and fruits, or probably mostly vegetables, by 2003 that may be genetically modified. Now the principal crops that are genetically modified are corn and soybeans and canola oil and probably potatoes in terms of acreage. And organic growers are very concerned about these crops, and a lot of organic growers grow them. And for crops like corn and canola, even if they do what they have to do and grow a non-GMs crop of their own, because of the danger of cross-pollination, both canola and corn rely on the wind carrying their pollen to other plants, and in order to make corn, to make grain. And there is the potential that an organic field of corn or an organic field of canola could be contaminated unintentionally on the part of the organic grower anyway, by wind pollination from a neighboring crop. And you might be growing organic sweet corn, but your neighbor might be growing BT field corn, and so people who grow those crops have been trying to understand how far away, what kind of distance would there need to be between your crop and that BT crop to make sure that your crop wasn't going to be contaminated by the BT crop, and those distances. They could be very, very great if you both planted the same variety and they both pollinated at the same time, and the wind was blowing in the right direction. You might need to be as much as a mile or 2 miles apart. Seed companies, not seed companies, but there are crop improvement associations in all the states of the United States and a lot of countries in the world who have developed a whole set of of information that they use in trying to grow pure seeds. And this information has been out there long before GMO crops were around. And the standard distance if you're growing a corn crop, a hybrid corn crop, and you don't want it to be pollinated by another corn crop from a field nearby, you need to have an isolation distance of some 660 feet. I mean, almost 2 football fields difference between your crop and another crop that might be pollinating at the same time. And it's pretty daunting to think that an organic grower, if he wants to maintain that pledge of no GMO contamination in his crop, suddenly puts himself out of the corn business because he can't possibly, or she can't possibly, isolate his corn 660 feet from what his neighbor might be doing. But it needn't be sort of quite as hopeless as that, because there are other kinds of isolation that a farmer can use. You can isolate your crop from a neighboring crop by time. You could grow a crop that pollinates earlier or later than the BT crop that grows next to you. And distance is one, and variety, varieties that pollinate at a different time is another. So there are other strategies that you can use besides distance to protect your organic crop from unintended pollen contamination. But I have a feeling that the organic industry isn't going to impose those much greater buffer zones on organic growers in order to make good their claim that organic crops can't be GD. I think they'll look at those numbers and think they can't possibly mandate those kinds of distances for most growers. So that I have a feeling for the next couple of years, organic certification organizations will, and the industry as a whole, are going to try to get growers to gather more information about the growing practices and varieties that their neighbors are doing, and the inspection process will have to be by certification organizations will have to be much more thoroughgoing, and there'll have to be much more attention paid to when various crops pollinate in the neighborhood. And you can't hear me? So that I don't think that right off organic certification standards would be rewritten with these much greater buffer zones. I mean, usually a buffer zone for a certified organic farm now is, what, 20 to 40 feet, 20 to 40 feet, not 600 feet. The other area that the organic industry as a whole has had to look at in trying to make good on this promise that organic foods wouldn't have GMO components is the whole area of processed food products. The co-ops, our national food stores are full of foods in boxes and bags that have been frozen or canned or dried and mixed with other ingredients, and most of the ingredients in those boxes are certified organically grown, are derived from certified organically grown crops. But if you look at the ingredient panels on them, there are often ingredients, minor ingredients in those processed food products that haven't been organically grown, and a number of them are based on these crops that are now increasingly dominated by GM seeds, like less of them, like vitamins, like vitamin E or vitamin C, that are derived from corn or derived from soy, and many certified organic finished products have those GM ingredients in them, and the organic industry has allowed those non-organic ingredients in processed food products just because it seemed infeasible to require certifiers to find those in a certified organic form. But I have a feeling that this new world of and the consumer resistance to genetic modified foods will push the certification organizations to be stricter in what those minor ingredients can be, and that in an effort to make sure that none of the lecithin is GMO, and none of the vitamin E is GMO, and none of the vitamin C is GMO, some pretty humongous levels of cooperation and industry pressure will have to be brought to bear to get to make ADMs and Henkel's and the drug companies of the world to make those products available in that form. The other area that the organic industry has been grappling with now is whether, in making that non-GMO claim, they should be requiring testing of finished products to verify that that claim is in fact correct. And I have a feeling that that rather than head in the direction of mandating testing, much of which would inevitably be borne, the cost of which would be borne by farmers, that the organic world will probably take the same approach with GMOs as they take now with pesticides, in that they describe organic growing as a as a set of practices and principles, and pesticide residue testing and GMO testing will only be used in cases where a certification organization feels that in this particular case there's a risk of contamination, and that will be a more episodic, more incidental use of testing rather than an across-the-board testing. But once you think about testing, you also have to think about tolerances. I mean, if you find something, at what levels do you no longer consider the crop certified organic, or at what levels do you sort of think they can go ahead and a farmer can go ahead, or a processor can go ahead and sell it anyway? And there are lots of different testing tolerance levels being mentioned especially in Europe, by different organizations. Some people that are testing are allowing as much as 2%, and I honestly don't know what that percentage means, but allow a 2% level of GM foods in a product and still consider it to be GMO free. More militant anti-GMO people are suggesting a level of 0.1%, which, from what I understand, is pretty much the limits of detection with the testing methods that are available now. And so that if that was the standard, you would in effect have a no detectable level. If anything was found, the product would be considered non-organic or certainly not non-GMO free. But all these questions are sort of still, all these issues are being pondered within the organic industry and by certification organizations. No final answers have been, or policies have been formulated at this point, and so there's the opportunity for people, farmers and anyone involved with organic foods, to make their opinions known.
How's everybody doing? Okay? Feels a little hot here. So, Bert told me I hadn't been introducing people for the camera well, so just to say, this is Will Stevens right here. So the camera knows Will Stevens and Susan Smiley. And we'll now be hearing from Sonia Schmitz.
Thank you. People have really, Susan and the other panelists have really been covering this issue very well. Really received an introduction to all the issues that surround this very complicated thing that stands before us, which is genetically modified foods. My background, as you've heard, is as a scientist, and I worked for DuPont for 8 years. I started working there because I believed the rhetoric that was out there from places like DuPont and Monsanto that biotechnology is going to be the latest revolution in agriculture and it's going to feed the world. And so thinking, well, I'm a scientist, what a better place to do science? To help humanity, benefits to society and all that stuff. Well, after working there for several years, I found myself working on ridiculous projects. Things like making a genetically modified cornstarch that can then be advertised as natural cornstarch. What it is, you know, modified cornstarch, when you see it on processed foods or in the grocery store, it really means chemically modified food starch. And it's an essential ingredient if you're going to have processed foods. Well, the idea behind making a genetically modified food starch was to have the corn plant introduce new starch synthesis genes into a corn plant and ask the corn plant to make a weird starch that behaves like a chemically modified starch. The end result of a project like this is basically more Jello instant pudding. You know, I mean, that's what it's all about. More frozen foods, more processed foods. But my favorite project was what we call the fartless soybeans, or cloning the fart monkey. And I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding about this. This was about making soybean. You know, I mean, so legumes accumulate these trisaccharides, these sugars that we can't digest on our own. The bacteria in our gut finishes the digestion process, and a byproduct of that is gas. So the idea was, let's make a soybean that doesn't accumulate these complex sugars in the end, and that way it won't cause human flatulence. So, you know, a friend of mine said, yeah, but Sonia, you know, there are people with digestive problems that, you know, they might really benefit from that. That might not be such a bad thing. And I'm like, no. For a company like DuPont or Monsanto to take on a project like this, they're not focused on the small percentage of people in the United States that might have digestive problems. Okay, that's not their thing. Making $1 million isn't enough. It has to be 100 million on something. So it was after, you know, these kinds of projects that I was convinced that biotechnology was not about feeding the world at all. You know, forget the distribution versus what the feeding the world by making more food versus the distribution issue, that it just doesn't get around. You know, the kinds of projects that these companies are doing are not about feeding the world or making higher yielding crops or things like that. Since then, I've been working on my PhD in botany, and I still do genetics, and I still use the techniques that I learned and used at DuPont, but I'm using them to very different ends. Now I'm studying natural populations and trying to learn a little bit more about how gene flow works and working with rare species. I'm not cloning things anymore and putting them into plants in order to make a product. That's the big difference. Now I've begun to understand a little bit more about what the environmental problems are with genetically engineered crops. And I can tell you that in my 8 years at DuPont, no one asked that question. When these products go in front of the FDA or the EPA, they're just about testing baby residues in soil, things that they're asking very limited questions. Science is all about asking questions, but if you're not asking the right ones, you're not going to find the answer. So what I want to say about my other panelists here have already touched on, you know, contaminating natural populations with these genetically engineered crops, making super weeds, you know, which is what that is about. Susan mentioned the distance between, you know, contaminating organic farms with these things. A recent study in Scotland, the buffer zone, they call the buffer zone for testing genetically engineered crops is 50 meters. But this group in Scotland has been doing experiments trying to detect genes in natural populations, and they found that they can travel as far as 4 kilometers. So instead of 50 meters, we're talking 4,000 meters away. You can still find these genes in natural populations. So they get out there. You know, superweeds this is just what confounds me. Because a lot of these are herbicide-tolerant crops that are grown out there. It is like 50, 60 million acres in 1998, and most of that was herbicide-tolerant crops, or herbicide-resistant crops. And you know, the industry, when asked, well, what if these genes get out there and make super weeds? Or what if these genes get out there, what if these crops end up creating more herbicide resistance, you know, or tolerance, so that the herbicides become obsolete? And the industry's response to this is, well, do integrated weed management. In other words, rotate your genetically engineered crop and your Roundup Ready soybeans one year, and then do BT corn the next year on that same field, and keep rotating like that. And what occurred to me was that if these genes get out there and make new weeds that then come in and contaminate the farm field and make life harder for the farmer, why should a chemical company like that care? What does that do?
Gives them more business.
That's right. It forces the farmer to buy other herbicides, and well, that's primarily it. They make new weeds. In a recent article, someone quoted Monsanto about the BT thing. You know, so, well, what about increased resistance to BT, insect resistance to BT? Don't worry, he said. We've got a lot of different kinds of BT out there. We can handle it. So this is the mentality that's coming from these chemical companies that are now controlling our crops, our seeds. One last thing that I wanted to touch on is that for me, you know, people are saying, well, are these things really dangerous? And the evidence is starting to come through that there are environmental risks and there are health risks, antibiotic resistance. When I was working there, we really did think, well, if you eat a genetically engineered crop, you know, your stomach degrades everything. I mean, that's what digestion is about. So the genes, the DNA, are going to be degraded in there. Well, other research groups have started looking at that a little more closely. And again, in Switzerland, they did a study, and they found out that not all the DNA gets degraded. And they can be taken up, these pieces of DNA can be taken up by bacteria in our gut, and then that's how antibiotic resistance gets spread, and then causes health problems for us. It's about asking the right questions, and the industry has not been asking the right questions. So again, you know, when you're talking about testing of products, that's what the FDA will always says. You know, well, if we look at the end product of the starch or the oil or the proteins that come out of genetically modified foods, they don't look a hell of a lot different than ungenetically modified. Well, again, it's a matter of what question are you asking. But we as a country, as a nation, need to begin, and we've started, some of us do think in larger terms than just the product. We think about the process. That is what organic is all about. It's a set of principles. It's a set of techniques. It's a process of producing food that is more environmentally friendly than what we've been using, industrial chemical agriculture. And biotechnology is just more industrial agriculture, chemical agriculture. It is a process that is going to contaminate our natural populations, cause unknown health risks. Why are we doing this when we have alternatives like organic around? It's what confounds me. Why in this day and age, since the 1970s and our new ecological consciousness, are we still growing food the way we do it? So, you know, Will brought up the questions, do we really need these products? The industry needs these products, because these are new markets for the industry. That's what I have to say about
it. So can you pan over to the end of the table here, Bert? Or Will will stand up? Okay, great. I'm going to introduce you for the camera. This is Will Raps, our last panelist tonight.
I gotta stand up because I found out that Susan and I both threw our back out on Monday. And sitting down a long time makes it worse. So I'm gonna stand up. I'm not sure where to begin because a lot of the thoughts that I have been covered, and I am not an expert. So I'm going to sort of use your advice to sort of talk about what I know about. And what I know about is 20 years ago when I started the Gardener Supply Company, I did it because there wasn't really a way for people to get easy access to an array of organic solutions. And some of our early products were actually going to commercial agriculture, but organic commercial agriculture, whether it was the University of New Hampshire, where we looked at what they were doing with splitted row cover, crop covers, and remay, or the University of Massachusetts, where we were looking at what they were doing with sticky red balls to deal with apple maggot moths, or whether it was looking at trying to bring BT and such products, which were in commercial agriculture, to the home gardener. And in that process, we established a reputation and a commitment to the idea that organic matters and that we, in fact, could create a market for people who thought that was important. And we spent the 80s building that market. And I got to the early 90s, and one day I was raided by the EPA. And they came in, and they went through my warehouse, and they found that I was actually selling unregistered pesticides. I admit it. They fined me $50,000. Now, the unregistered pesticides were a citronella candle to deal with mosquitoes, an herbal flea collar for dogs, which we said was a flea control, and an organic pesticide which was castor oil to deal with moles. Now, this was an odd thing. You know, they did a press conference, we found another one. And so I said, okay, I'll do a press conference too. And I came back with a press conference saying, these bozos, this is the Boston EPA, are ludicrous in how they choose to spend their resources. And I dug deeper, and I used Senator Leahy to help me understand. And it was Hart's Mountain Corporation, which is a big animal pest control company, that pointed the finger at me. And there was another pesticide large corporation that pointed the finger at me. And what they do is they have people out there looking for how to discredit and attack people who are essentially creating a different paradigm than in chemicals we can find our solutions. So we went about a several-year process of changing the legislation, working with Senator Leahy. Fortunately, the Bush-Reagan administration went out. The people in the Boston EPA got a degree of common sense. And they came back and they apologized. They said, we did something that was stupid and a waste of our resources. What can we do about that? And we worked on a process that makes a fast-track pesticide approval process for things like cedar chips that you might want to put in your closet to protect yourself from moths. That is a pesticide that's regulated by the EPA. We said, does it really make sense to be used for 7,000 years to no negative effect as far as we can understand? So it got me to realize that in fact there's this larger process that goes on, that government and industry are part of in creating a dynamic that is somehow the status quo of economic development moving in a certain direction. And that status quo as it relates to agriculture was well defined by a Secretary of Agriculture 30 or 40 years ago, where he said, get big or get out. And that process of getting big or get out is in fact the underlying reality that our government has been advancing. And it seems to me that what genetic engineering is today in agriculture is just an extension of the Green Revolution of the 50s and 60s on steroids, applied to a much faster paced way, where the discovery is we can control our food system much more effectively and consolidate and concentrate it much more successfully. So Susan mentioned Dan Glickman, Secretary of Agriculture, and he did a great press conference at the National Press Club 2 weeks ago. And I want to sort of play off of some of the things he was saying. He was saying that ag biotech has enormous potential to combat hunger. Genetically modified plants have the potential to raise to help resist killer weeds that are literally starving people in Africa and other parts of the world. Biotech can help solve some of the most vexing environmental problems, like reducing pesticide use, increasing yields, improving nutritional content, using less water. But in some parts of the world, there's a great consumer resistance and great cynicism toward biotechnology. And then he went on to say, we have such good regulatory control, we don't have to have that kind of negativity in the US, but over in Europe, they don't have such regulatory control. Partly because they haven't succumbed to industrial agriculture controlling and dominating their little world. What they still have is small farmers who have communities who say, what I put in the water or what I put in my food matters, and if I don't pay attention to that, the people in my community are going to come back. They're not going to buy from me, and they're going to get mad at me, and they're going to spit on my children, or whatever they're going to do. And that's a regulatory process that is still in place in places where farming is part of the community, and farmers are in fact of a scale that fits into those communities. So then I learned about looked into this further. I learned about a crop called witchweed. Did you ever work on witchweed? Anyone know what witchweed is? Witchweed is this African weed. It's an amazing weed, apparently, that it attacks cereal crops like sorghum or millet. And in fact, up to 40% of the African cereal crop is consumed every year because of witchweed. And it's a weed that the plant produces hundreds of thousands of seeds, little tiny seeds. The seeds go into the soil, and they can last for 20 years and still be viable. And what triggers these seeds to grow is the chemical synergistic reaction with the host plant. So when a sorghum begins to put its roots out, that seed says, it's time for me to come alive. And essentially, when it grows, it has some kind of an enzyme process that attacks those roots of those plants and leaches the nutrients out of them and kills them. And this witchweed product would be a great thing for us to find a solution for Africa if they in fact could increase their crop output by, their cereal crop output by 40%. So Pioneer Hybrid Seeds began to look at this question of genetic engineering for dealing with the witchweed process. And as I understand it, they in fact developed a strain of sorghum that was herbicide resistant. So then you could spray this sorghum. You could spray the sorghum with pesticide or with herbicides that would in fact take the witchweed down. But a university professor over here asked the question, I wonder what happens if there is some kind of genetic outcrossing with other kinds of sorghum-related plants. And so, in fact, he did some tests and discovered that another weed that was from Africa, got introduced into the US 150 years ago, called Johnson grass, was a beautiful relative of sorghum, and in fact was a great cross-hybridizing plant with this herbicide-resistant sorghum. And so he sort of said, hello, if you take this plant out there into Africa, chances are good that what you're going to do is create a herbicide-resistant superweed in Johnson grass, and who knows what that's going to do. So there was someone who raised their hand saying, oops, a problem. Similar kind of issue came up with, who was it that did the Brazil nut?
It was a Pioneer.
It was a Pioneer hybrid as well. They took it wasn't about flatulence reduction, I think it was about flavor increasing. They said,
Protein.
Protein increasing. With that protein increasing, that's right. So they took sorghum and soybeans, and they said, can we essentially genetically engineer the protein, some of the protein creating capacity of Brazil nuts into this soybean, and they went through and created a soybean that had that possibility, and then then someone asked the question at some point, gee, I wonder if, does anyone have a nut allergy in here? A good friend of mine has a deathly nut allergy. He eats a nut and he's like, can't breathe. And they said, I wonder if this triggers people with nut allergies to have a reaction. And in fact, they found out it did. Now this was Pioneer Hybrid asking that question. They asked the right question. But what if that question had not been asked? I was in a radio interview with someone from Monsanto a couple months ago, and we were sort of going back and forth on these kinds of issues. And I pointed out that one of Monsanto's head of public relations had said that essentially, Monsanto's job was to create new products, as Sonia said, to create new wealth for their shareholders. That's their job. The government's job is to regulate that process. So then we listen to the government, and the government says, and this is one of the key issues that I found in all this process that's critical. And this was an FDA policy in 1992, which says essentially that the FDA is following the concept that genetically modified seed in fact creates a crop that is substantially equal to the crop that's ungenetically modified. Therefore, it does not need to have any higher level of regulation than any other kind of crops. Yet you're introducing these kinds of weird foreign substances, the impact of which we don't fully understand or really can't understand. So had Hybrid Pioneer not asked the question, is a allergen in there going to affect people with a nut allergy, you might have had trouble had you eaten that tofu pack. Totally off the subject in a way, but the sense of the positive side of this issue is something that I got in an email yesterday from the United States Naval War College. The United States Naval War College, I'm on strange listservs, but they had done an analysis of Y2K. And it is actually one of the most interesting analyses I've seen, because what they said was Y2K is only an event that's about to happen that we're all rallying around trying to understand how that's going to affect us. But underlying that is we're going to have a whole series of Y2Ks in the future, because the integration we have increasingly of our information and communications is just going to create a level of complexity. And so they made a series of conclusions about how Y2K, for the people who are encouraged about a future where we are more linked, actually is not a threat. It's just one of a lot of hurdles we're going to have to figure out how to get over. But one of their conclusions was that in the future, there will be an increasingly high price for secrecy and an increasing value added for the concept of transparency. And I think this genetic engineering conversation has a lot to do with that idea that if governments deceive us, which I think our government generally has a policy of doing, then what we're going to have is a negative consumer reaction of profound proportions. Just like things like Alar tripped some real changes. So I'm more encouraged than depressed about some of the things I see going on right now. Will mentioned the interesting trade war that's emerging. And what you didn't say about the fact that truffles and Roquefort cheese now have 100% penalty is at the same time the French started to pick at McDonald's. So people began to ask the question, is this industrialized food system really something that we want shoved down our throat, literally? And I think it's a question that is going to be more visible, particularly as the process of understanding the future becomes one of the internet and other kinds of vehicles, giving us a lot more validation for transparency and a lot more rejection of when secrecy is tried to be advanced. Susan asked me to talk a little about the effect on farmers. And I don't have a lot to say. Will already said a lot of that, except that we have been in a 50-year process of getting industrialized in our agriculture. And one of the implications from a financial standpoint on that is that if you take the period of 1984 to 97, that 14-year period, the average price of a market basket, that's a collection of food in this country, went up, excluding inflation, by 2.8% across that entire time frame. The consumers, therefore, won. The average value that farmers got for that same market basket of food went down 35%. So farmers lost. The average return on equity, which is a way of measuring your return on your investment if you're a business, was 17% per year for food processors, and the average return on equity for food retailers was 18% a year. So what we've really created is a system that increasingly makes the consumer feel good because my prices are being maintained. Not a real clear view of what quality is, not a clear view of if anyone's really looking out for their interests, but the people who are now dominating our food system being very happy, thank you very much, for 18, 17, 18, 19% returns on their investment every year. And that's really what we're creating here. And the question that I always ask when I get to that point is farming a business? Or is farming, in fact, something very different than that, which is some kind of a common trust that we have, both for the reason that Susan mentioned about our food is core to who we are and quality is important, but also the idea that farming done well becomes an integral part of our fabric, whether it's understanding, whether it's health, whether it's environmental quality, whether it's the open working landscape that we have here in Vermont. And what we have is a systematic policy for the last 50 years of our government saying, too bad, it's going to be centralized, it's all going to come from California, no, let's move it to Mexico. It's all going to come from Mexico or Kansas, and everyone else doesn't have to worry about it because we'll take care of you. And that process has got no real has got very little resistance to it. The organic movement is a resistance to that, but they don't have a lot of credibility. What we've done, they don't have a lot of, they have increasing credibility, but they don't have a lot of impact in terms of the overall economic reality. Now, what you do have is some of these half a dozen mega food companies beginning to recognize that they'd like to become part of this organic movement because there's 20% or plus growth every year. And that's where 2 or 3 years ago, when the organic certification changes were proposed, they included, and I don't know what I'd love to know, Susan, what the underlying politics were of GMO seeds or products being potentially approvable in organics. But there was 300,000 consumers in America that said, no, we don't like that idea. And Gardner Supply was one of the companies that said, be careful, some bad things are about to happen. Moving towards this transparency. In our summer catalog, we put this ad in. It's a food. It's an insecticide. And this was essentially, and now McDonald's didn't like the fact that we used their trademark little boxes. But in fact, they do use BT potatoes, and you're probably eating them if you eat at McDonald's. And this is the kind of realities or revelations that need to be out there. And we've got a very strange conspiracy in our media here to avoid some of that kind of information being allowed out. And the only way that that's going to change is for an attitude of indignation, the education you're talking about, but then the attitude of indignation that says our food is something that is not to be tampered with. And somehow in America we've just bought into the idea that that's not really something that's that important to us. And I think the concept of it's low cost, it's always plentiful, has helped that reality. At the same time, in February, there was an issue of the AMA Journal which pointed out that a male born in 1949, which I happen to have been, was 3 times more likely to get cancer than their grandfather. And a female born in 1949 is 2 times more likely to get cancer than their grandmother. And I went on to talk about the fact that farmers, in fact, lead this by a decade or 2. So farmers are one of those risk groups that are increasing at a more rapid rate than the general population in terms of the propensity to get cancer. Is this because of the stress? Maybe it is. Or is there something else going on there that is not being fully explored? So that's pretty what I want to say.
Great. Thank you, Will. I'll just say transparency was a big word at that USDA World Trade Organization hearing, huh? There was a World Trade Organization public listening session in Burlington a week and a half ago, and all the 7 men on the stage who were, various Undersecretary of Agriculture and the World Trade Representative from the United States, and all these sundry high-level folk kept talking about transparency as a really important sort of concept, that I think they're beginning to understand that this is, the consumer voice is starting to really come forward now. So I'd like to open to questions from the audience, but I know it's also getting later in the evening too, and there's a few things that I'd like to make sure people get as handouts before they leave. So what I'm going to do is set these two piles of things onto each side of the room, and I ask that you pass them around. I created these resource lists that basically give some idea of what's going on here in Vermont. There's two initiatives in our House of Representatives that one calls for a study of the impacts of agricultural genetic engineering in our state, environmental and economic. And the second one has been introduced. It's a joint House resolution asking for the state of Vermont to claim to the USDA that they stop research on and not patent the Terminator technology, which is the seed sterilization technology. Both of these have been brought into the House of Representatives by a man named David Zuckerman from Winooski. He's a progressive, and he has been diligently working to educate people on this issue. It's probably important to note that when he first introduced this to the Agriculture Committee in the House of Representatives, it was the first bill on the study of genetic engineering. It was voted down 9-2 by the House Agriculture Committee. By the time Dave got finished with the education of the people on the Agriculture Committee, it was voted through. It was passed 11-0. So it speaks a lot to the power of really, starting to get the facts and different concerns out there.
Dave is also a farmer in the Intervale.
Dave is also a farmer in the Intervale. He's an organic farmer in the Intervale, and a really good and hard-working person in the legislature. He also assured me that it does not matter that you only write your representatives or senators in our state. He said it's really important. The first bill is in the Appropriations Committee right now. He claims that it's very important, if you want to make your voice known, to write to everybody or call everybody on the Appropriations Committee. And the same thing in regard to the Agriculture Committee with the genetic seed sterilization technology bill. So, and then I also put in there some sample letters for anybody who wants to write letters to Jeffords, Leahy, Bernie, the EPA, or the FDA. They're in my words, and they're always pretty powerful if you put them in your own words, and don't worry that you don't know enough. It's important to just start getting your voice known, I think. And then the last page is a resource list of organizations, and especially with websites. I have to say, after starting to talk with Will Stevens and Susan and Will Rapp, I have also, my first community in starting to find people to talk with about this issue is actually on the internet. And it's the first time that that's happened for me. I've always, virtual community is one thing. I really prefer community in person, live and really there. But that was really my first place where I started realizing that there actually is education and resistance, if you will, and the push toward transparency. That there really is there's an undercurrent of real concern happening all around this country. So I think every single organization I listed there has a website, and they're all really good and diligently working on this issue. The last thing that it's important to know as far as our state goes is that Senator Jeffords chairs the Senate committee that oversees the Food and Drug Administration. So there's a few levels at which we in this state are uniquely positioned to up the ante on this conversation about genetic modification of foods. We are considered a pure food state. There was an article in The Nation that I have here. Rural Vermont has sent me a packet of that information, and there's a really good article in The Nation that I have that really, the title of it was Vermont, the Pure Food State. And it spoke specifically about the fight against RBGH in this state. So, you know, there's some consideration here for, well, what would it mean in our state if our state started taking a public stand against the growing of genetically modified crops? Some people say that that's radical. And, you know, for some people it is. But it's also something to consider in terms of a value added to our state product for the farmers in our state who are supplying us with our food. I also was, so anyway, just to let you know that the Senate subcommittee that he chairs is called Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. How those all fit together, I'm not really sure, but that's the committee. And then a number of us have formed, are beginning to form a coalition. Sonia and Will Rapp and I were part of the meeting. Will and I had helped to organize it with the help of a few other people that gathered together nonprofits and businesses and people working in the public interest and activists who are working specifically on this issue. We had one meeting in June, and we're having our next meeting in September, and we're really looking at what we can do to focus a conversation with our state, with our representatives, Leahy and Sanders and Jeffords, for the year 2000 elections, because this isn't really being spoken about at that political level either, and obviously it needs to be. We're coming into an election year, and we have a vice presidential candidate who bills himself as Mr. Environmental. And I think it's really important to know that Al Gore has been working on the side of the biotech industry for a long time. And he's going to need to address that if we make him address it. And I think it's really important to call that forward, because then if he addresses it, everybody else needs to start, So just know that. We don't really have a lot of time to waste here, because we're starting to move right into that place.
Yeah. Since we're talking about ways to get involved or what's happening in Vermont, I'm part of a group called NERAGE, or New England Resistance Against Genetic Engineering. So if you need some place to write to or call to get more information or find out what's going on as far as we organize demonstrations occasionally, grab a card with the cartoon on front and give us a call.
And NERAGE is also on that resource list. So. And then before we start to open to questions for people who want to stay on for a while, I'll also say I have, again, in regard to thinking that we're beginning to get a group together that's addressing these issues, I have a mailing list. I'm not quite sure how we're going to be putting this together, but even if you got a postcard, if you'd like to start getting information, I would welcome you to sign this, and again, we can just pass it around. And then I also have a petition from rural Vermont, which some of you have probably signed already, that is asking for Senators Leahy and Jeffords to mandate the Food and Drug Administration to begin addressing the safety issues in foods. And that's over here. And I'll have these over on maybe close to the end of the speaker's table, or pass one around, and we'll have the other one over here. So those are some of the things that are going on in our state so far. And I just wanted to say one more piece here. Vern Grubinger, who is you can help me with this, Will, Director of Outreach for Sustainable Agriculture, or the Director of Outreach, or Director of the Center for Sustainable Agriculture here in this state. He has commentaries on VPR every once in a while, and I find them to be really good. And he had one a few days ago, the same day as the World Trade Organization, actually, that had some pretty interesting statistics. He was talking about the Small Farms Report that was done by the federal government. And he says that today there are 300,000 fewer farmers in 1979, and the farmer receives 23 cents of every consumer dollar spent on food, down from 37 cents in 1979. And then he was going on to say, meanwhile, corporate dominance of our food supply has increased. So just think about that, 37 cents on every dollar in 1979. Now the farmer's receiving 23 cents of every dollar since 1979. He also had a statement that agriculture was only second to the pharmaceutical companies in terms of return on investment. So that's investment in research and development, which is exactly what we're talking about here. So just as far as regionalism goes, once in a while I think, and this is the part of me that starts getting optimistic rather than depressed, that what we're dealing with here may end up in the end being the greatest ally for the whole concept and practice of regional agriculture. And so just to say that, you know, Will Stevens is one person in our area who's growing our food. And Lewis Creek Farms is another one, and Marjorie and Marion at Orb Weaver Farm. You know, we have a number of people who are supplying us with our food in our area. And we can go directly to them and buy our food at the farmers markets, through community-supported agriculture programs, or through buying at the co-op, which is not so direct, but still, it's you know, very different than planning on getting your food from an unknown source, essentially. So I just want to say that, you know, if it's important to us, if the integrity of our food is important to us and knowing about its sourcing, and also it's important to us to keep our farmers in business and to be able to have a source for this food, we need to be able to support that economically. And I think that means going as direct as possible. And we're really lucky that we live here because to some degree we have the opportunity to do that. So I guess that's all. Ross has something that he would like to say to the group as well, or would like to have a moment.
Yeah,
Ross.
well, thanks. We were talking about local initiatives, and I just want to mention, I know some people here from the Natural Food Co-op, they're members, and the co-op here in Middlebury right now is considering how to, or whether to address this issue as a co-op. So anyone who's a member, you're a part owner. Your ideas and inputs just as important as anyone else's. I would encourage you to let the board of directors of the co-op know what your feelings are, let the management know what your feelings are. Right now, the buying criteria committee, which is the committee that's discussing this and how to perhaps bring it to the board of directors for some kind of a decision, a policy, is having committee meetings, and the next one is going to be on the 5th of August upstairs at the co-op at 7 o'clock. If anybody wants to come, it'd be great to have your input, whether you're a member, whether you're thinking of being a member, everyone's welcome. And if I could, Susan, I just want to thank you so much for bringing this together. This is great.
So, does anybody in the audience have a question they'd like to address to one or more of our panelists? Yeah.
I don't know how you got copies of this. Mine's already highlighted. I just wanted to thank Susan again. She's done a huge amount of work. But the past couple of decades, the scientists have been saying one of the big threats to the environment is the increased problem with exotic plants and animals traveling around the globe. And what's a little bit scary to me is it feels like what is happening with GMOs is we're creating our own exotics, like homegrown exotics, you know, where we live. It doesn't have to come from far away. That seems really scary. One question I had for maybe panelists was, so I'm a retailer as well as a consumer. It really sounds like the cost, especially some of the things that Susan Smiley was maybe addressing, it really sounds like the cost of organics is going to go up. It's been coming down, much to a lot of us, you know, very happy about that. But increase in regulations and the cost of those things to guarantee organics, it just sounds very scary. The prices may start going up, and I wonder if you all think the same thing.
as far as, I mean, the only organic crops that are threatened at this point are the corn, soybeans, and canola, and potatoes. And I think the people on the certification side of things still feel that the practices that are in place now will, except for the worry about cross-pollination, will be sufficient to keep an organic crop organic. And I don't think without a couple of years of real serious data gathering from crops that are grown organically and harvested this summer and next summer in California this winter and next winter, that you will really know how much unintended contamination of organic crops there is and how much testing will really be necessary. So I think it's certainly time to worry, but I don't think you can say for sure.
I wonder if you can tell me how to respond to people who say it would be impossible for us to grow enough organic food to feed the population. Because I've had that said to me so many times that I don't really know how to answer it. Is there an answer?
We love our farmers.
You know, actually, can I just, I don't know if anyone hasn't seen this piece of writing, it's really excellent, and I think it might speak a little bit to that issue, especially with the answer of we need more farmers. This is a great Sunday New York Times Magazine cover story on genetic engineering that is so well written and very balanced. And part of what the writer does is takes a tour of Idaho potato farms, 2 commercial farms, and then 1 organic farm. And it really speaks to the difference in management practices and the amount of work involved, but also the amount of payback involved. So I just wanted, but the article is fabulous. So, but I don't want to preempt an answer for you. I just wanted, we got a little.
Yeah, it seems like once upon a time it was done. You know.
That's a perfect answer.
I think we have to stop thinking about that answer that that it can't be done, it can't be done. Well, sure, in the existing system it can't be done. It's not allowed to happen. So 3 of my crew, this year's crew, is here today. I've heard this before, but there's a book that I read back at UVM in environmental studies called Ecology and the Politics of Scarcity by William Opels. And one of the things he talked about was a systems approach to problems. And one of the an example of this was to lower the speed limit to 25 miles an hour nationwide, and let the chips fall where they may. And if that was an approach that the federal government took, then all of a sudden a lot more organic farms would pop up. Because the distribution system would be so altered that bicycles would become a viable mode of transportation, for example.
Necessity.
Right. I mean, so if we can get out of thinking about this current dysfunctional system that we have now, then yeah, I think it's very possible.
Yeah, maybe this is more of a comment, but in my source of researching this whole issue for a while, I think that it's $1 billion industry and they've invested billions of dollars in all the research, and so that's kind of what we're up against. It isn't something that they're going to let go of really easily. And I had the opportunity to hear Santish Kumar speak this past spring, and he was one of the founders of Schumacher College, and they dealt with this issue a lot in England. And I asked him, what do you see as the solution to this? This is such a huge problem. And he said, boycott. Refuse to buy it. Which means, basically, for me as a consumer, is I'm buying organically grown things. Because I know that if I buy organic, I'm not buying genetically altered food. And I think that that's one thing where our pocketbook can actually make a huge political statement. And if they're finding that it's not profitable and that people aren't buying this stuff, that's a really good way.
There's sort of a revolution going on in Europe right now where the main supermarkets are because of the consumers, are saying, okay, we're not going to carry GMO foods.
Right.
Now, if that sort of began to take root at a level over here, there would be a real shift. One of the things that Glickman said in his talk a couple weeks ago is maybe we do have to look more carefully at whether labeling is something that is appropriate. And I think, I just think that creating some distinctiveness and choice is part of the solution.
Right. I guess part of why it's not labeled is because like the flounder is considered food and it's safe. And tomatoes are a food and they're safe. And that's how they get through the EPA. They don't have to, go through that whole process. And so it's this really weird double blind as far as how these foods get out there and how they've avoided labeling.
Well, and I think that whole process of saying no, like they've done in Europe, and we know we won't accept the importation of these products, is already taking effect in this country. DuPont and ADM are contracting for substantial acreages of non-GMO, Roundup resistant, but non-GMO corn and soybean crops that they are paying farmers a premium to plant so that they can sell them at a premium in those European markets. And it's only because they can't, because those European markets said no, that change is taking effect here. And I think labeling is a much weaker demand, in my than a consumer boycott or various ways of saying no, we won't.
But how do you know what you're boycotting unless you have a sense of, if it all gets merged together, and over there's more lines being drawn. I think there's less lines being drawn in our foods from right here.
Yeah, for a quick example, you were talking about buffers and how organic growers would have to plant their corn 660 feet away. Why is it that organic growers have to take on that burden?
Well, and there are...
Wait a minute, our food is safe. It's this other guy that's planting the stuff. They ought to bear that cost. But you see, that's why we're thinking wrong. We're just thinking wrong. And we continue to think wrong.
Well, and these folks, people like Rafi and others are trying to are going to institute lawsuits and shift the burden of responsibility, try to shift the burden of responsibility, like chemical trespass laws, to those that are doing it contaminated.
I just wanted to comment about labeling again. And Will, you said it is important in order to make those decisions to have genetically modified foods labeled, but my fear is that if we go that route, our system is set up to deal with labeling.
Oh, yeah.
We're set up. Then you're going to start that whole game of testing, risk, allowable levels of GMO. Right now, we are in a unique position primarily because of the resistance in Europe, that we can just nip it in the bud before it happens, before the whole biotechnology scene happens here, or becomes profitable. So, if, labeling may sound tempting, and we have a right to know, but, I think that it would greatly weaken our stance.
Yes. Well, I just have a question. Now, I thought I heard earlier that 60% of the food that we, in general, that's sold is genetically engineered.
Has genetically engineered ingredients. Processed food.
Right. I guess I have two comments. One is that the issue of globalization is, across the board, and that companies like Monsanto are becoming stronger than governments, and that's where the globalization nut seems to be, and we have to find ways to speak out against it. Maybe even at the grocery store, to pick a leaflet. I don't know. And I'm also, my question is it too late? I mean, if it's gone this quickly, 60%, is it too late?
I don't think it's too late. Just like the pressure that's coming from Europe down, our imports can't go. That's going to hurt the industrial agricultural market. It's not too late to get these things off of our shelves. ADM and Staley's, again, two big processing plants in the Midwest that make processed foods, have been, asking for non-genetically engineered, or they said they will only accept corn and soybeans that Europe will accept, that Europe will accept. In other words, not genetically modified. So the pressure, it's about exerting pressure to restaurants, to grocers.
Yeah.
Maybe this would be a good question for Will. I'm trying to understand why farmers would choose to grow genetically modified soybeans or corn over other non-biogenic products. I mean, is there really an advantage there?
Well, I think short term, yeah. You know, it looks good because it allows them to continue to farm the way they've been farming with potentially fewer inputs. So the information that's being presented to them is that the bottom line might look a little bit better.
Even with the contract that they have to pay a per acre fee, and that they can't save any of the seed, and they have to use the chemical from, they purchase the seed from Monsanto, they also have to buy all of that, they still come out ahead.
Yeah, well, understand the system they're already farming in.
Right.
They're already buying the chemicals. You know, they're already using the machinery that they have, and so forth and so on. This royalty that they're paying, and it is a royalty, and some companies handle it differently, but basically it's a licensing royalty to the companies, as well as a premium that they're already paying for the privilege of using this. But yeah, the theory is that, and I can't speak to it because I don't know for a fact, but I think if I understand it right, it allows them to kind of simplify their system. Maybe it requires one less application of herbicide. Maybe it's one pass over the field, depending on what they do, something like that.
And it also allows them to give up the use of herbicides in the corn system that have more residual life in the soil. And so that when they want to go in the next year and plant another broadleaf plant, the residues are there and they can't. And so the Roundup breaks down much more quickly and makes it easier for them to rotate back and forth between corn and soybean.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest reason.
Thank you.
The extension of grow your own food is save your seed out in your garden. And we each can, maybe we're passionate about one particular plant out there, so save that seed, because in reality, the loss of biodiversity is well documented. I know you sell Cokes and others. I know that I'm a particular fan of Seed to Change, sold here at Greenfields, who have done a great deal of work on traditionals and heirlooms. So the extension of that is we lose seeds every single day, not just because these companies are closing the loop, but also because of all the environmental impact with all the processes going on the earth right now, is for us individually to take responsibility for a plant kingdom in a very small way. Remember to save some seed.
Just a word of caution, try to make sure they're from open pollinated varieties,
Right.
hybrids.
Right, and you do need to become informed, because like Herkovitz will cross really quickly. I mean, there is some education that one needs to take on. However, we can empower ourselves in the meantime in a very small way to save these against this exponential loss every single day.
Yeah, we're trialing an onion variety this year that's a deep hybridized version of Cobra, which is a standard winter storage onion we've been growing for years. And it's a terrific onion, and apparently growers have dehybridized it over the years by backbreeding for these same qualities. And so we now have an onion called Clear Dawn, which is an open pollinated Cobra. And so far it looks good. We'll let you know in June if it scores as well as Cobra did. But my plan is to get it out there to a grower who can raise me the seed.
Yeah, Bunny. Is it mostly the people who have started this, protested this, importing our foods, or the farmers, or does business also support it, the government? How does that help?
There's been a lot of work by Greenpeace in Europe, which has really formulated a pretty concise campaign. You're also looking at an area which realistically is a lot smaller, and you also have a media within the European community that is very environmentally, quote-unquote, friendly. So there's a lot more press, et cetera, which is pertaining to the issue, so therefore it's easier for awareness to be raised.
Interestingly, in Britain, it's the tabloids, the equivalent to our, I don't know, what are they?
The Star.
The Star, yeah, that have jumped on this partly because they like to sort of ferment anxiety. But it's really reached the masses because that particular media has jumped on it.
Also, Prince Charles has become something of a folk hero over in Great Britain. He's an avid organic gardener, and in fact, this article here called Seeds of Disaster was his statement on some things really need to be left to God, and this is one of them. And that came in connection with the firing of a scientist from the lab in Edinburgh who made public the fact that through his research work of feeding genetically engineered potatoes to rats, that the rats' immune system and lymphatic system, I believe, were being invaded. And they were negative consequences. And it's a long story, but the scientist was fired from the lab, and it was later found out that the lab had been given a very large research grant, I believe, by Monsanto. But those were the auspices under which that particular study was being done, and he was a 35-year veteran of this science lab, and they were discrediting his work. And once the public got a hold of that, and it happened pretty close to the point in time when Prince Charles came out with this statement, Greenpeace jumped on that, and Greenpeace has been doing a tremendous amount of public awareness work in Europe, and they also are doing a lot here. And I think Greenpeace has more of a kind of radical persona here. And as I've been reading through their things on genetic engineering, I don't know, I can't understand it, which makes me think that maybe I'm, on the radical fringes of this movement or something. But they've raised awareness tremendously in Europe, and have really been instrumental in kind of catalyzing public, public action. So a lot of things happened at once, kind of happened synergistically there. But what they're doing is, what's happening in Europe is setting up the scene for us to work with it right away and right now. Just in the fact that Staley and ADM are saying now, oh, well, I guess we can separate our soybeans. That's important. They're saying they can separate them. My question is, does that mean that the non-GMO soybeans are going to go to Europe and the genetically modified soybeans are going to be sold to us here in the United States? It's really, it's kind of possible. I don't know if you noticed, but last April was called National Soy Foods Health Awareness Month. They're trying to create a market. In the Burlington Free Press about 4 weeks ago, there was a big article in the living section, the front of the living section, and the headline was, "Soy growers seek recognition for healthful being." This is years and years. It's countering years and years of saying that soy was, not necessarily as good as meat protein, and et cetera, et cetera. So, but we have the opportunity to move with this action in Europe, I think.
If I may, just I think that Vermont is a precedent-setting state. So, on a grassroots legislative angle, everybody looks to Vermont to see what's going on with more progressive legislation. Part of that is based on having a progressive party that's so evident. So I think it's really critical to write letters. I think it's really critical to legislate in the state, because that will set a precedent for the rest of the country.
Betty?
I'm just curious about how pure Japan's soy is.
I don't have any
anything about Japan soybeans?
Do you know anything about Japan soybeans, Susan?
They use an awful lot.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. Just in the reading that I've been doing, again, through the internet, the Japanese consumers are also not as keen on this as, they're just not,
They're not sensitive to this issue?
No, they are. They are sensitive.
They are sensitive to the issue?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
definitely. So, yeah, Carol.
60% of the food being engineered, is that including organics?
No, this is 60% of all, it is estimated that 60% of all processed foods in our supermarkets and our co-ops, et cetera, have some degree of genetically modified ingredient in them.
So if I don't eat processed food,
You can be,
But
you know,
my vegetables can still be.
well, I think we've been hearing that it's possible. I mean, we don't know. It's one of the things about the labeling issue, you know. When I realized that the seed packets aren't labeled, you know, that's where it really, I mean, come on, you know, really. So your grower doesn't even know what, you know, what they might be growing. So it's not foolproof, but I think that there is certainly staying away from processed foods and telling people why you're doing it. I mean, I've been starting to really work with the man who owns the store in Rochester, which is where I spend the other half of my life when I'm not in Middlebury. I'm over in Rochester, Vermont, and you know, he doesn't know much about it, but it's an independent grocer, and it just makes sense to start talking it out. You know, what happened at the demonstration at Price Chopper? Have you gotten word of that? Yeah, I mean, was it a success? Were there?
It was a success in that we were able to leaflet people and give them information, but you know, the people that own Price Chopper came out and were making sure that no one was, you know, causing too much of a ruckus, which we weren't. And then within an hour, we were relegated to that thin strip of public property where they can't tell you to get off. And you know, a policewoman came by to make sure that we stayed there. So we stood on the road and held up our posters and signs and information.
Was that really interesting?
Yeah, people were definitely interested.
I think one of the things that's really important that I've noticed is talking to people about what they're feeding, what they might want to feed their children or not feed their children. And with soybeans, that's a really important issue because infant formula is made from soybeans. So, you know, it's that seems to be something that catalyzes people's interest, even if they themselves might not be so worried about what they're ingesting. Yeah, Karen.
Question. Has Johnny's updated their policy on GMOs? Their seed catalog in the spring said they weren't currently selling them, but they were open to the concept.
Yeah.
Did they update that at all?
We're still working on it.
Yeah.
We're still, some people in New Rage and New England Resistance have been talking with Johnny's and trying to, we had a petition, we've had petitions out at NOFA conferences and things to try to show him that it would not be really good for his business if we started accepting GMOs. But it's kind of at a standstill.
Yes.
Well, I guess it really isn't that much of a question actually, but even through this like entire thing since here, I still don't really have much of an idea what's actually wrong with the actual genetically modified foods. Like what they do is have healthier foods, more prosperous, can thrive in areas that your non-genetically modified foods never could, and resistant to many things, so you don't need to use these pesticides, herbicides that actually are the poisonous things that we don't want to eat. And actually what seems to be what most of the concerns are with it are related issues that are completely separate, such as like getting the royalties, which is a completely different issue. If you were to go after the royalties, that would be separate than the actual genetically modified foods which have very little downsides, as I can see after this.
Were you here for the introduction? I mean, did you get here?
Yeah.
Were you here from the very beginning? Okay.
Yeah.
So did you hear me talk about what the group of 25 scientists have disclosed as far as the metabolic processes and possible effects without having long-term study? They're not giving any sense of danger.
See, but these genetically modified foods, they have much more testing than your non-genetically modified foods, which
no, they don't.
As far as my knowledge, perhaps I'm wrong.
They don't. They have very little testing. Unless the corporation that is developing them senses that there's any safety question, if the corporation has to come to the government and say, oh, we have a concern about the safety of this food that we've been developing, or this seed we've been developing, so can we have a conference with you about it? And so they have to ask for their own testing, essentially. So there's really very little testing.
But
My husband's a scientist who did a lot of work in genetics, and he said one of the things that frightens him the most about this whole issue is the fact that gene sequences, they all have, what they're doing is they're inserting gene sequences from opposing species that normally wouldn't grow together. And each one of those gene sequences has more than one operation, and very often they don't know what that is. And so when you're inserting genetic material into, say, a plant or, this whole process, you're also changing the whole structure of this, and many unknown factors can result that aren't even known at this point because our science isn't even that advanced. So within each sequence, there's this whole mystery where in nature that doesn't happen. The whole way that plants have evolved over thousands of years, and we've evolved with the plants. We've eaten the plant material as humans, and so there's this whole completely unknown factor that I think a lot of us are really concerned about.
But if we don't go through these steps of trying to genetically alter these foods, how will we be able to get a flawless or much less lawful way without doing these testings, without building up a business for these, which could lead to, as a road to having foods which don't have any downsides.
Well, possibly we need to wait for the 20 years that it would take to do the long-term systematic testing.
But just waiting, and what they are doing by selling these things, this is testing. I'm not saying it's guinea pigs. Sorry.
That's what I mean. We're all being guinea pigs for this huge testing information.
If you're to get corn that's twice as large, which is that's how most all corn is done, as you said, with genetically altering and such. But how is that going to be harmful? The good things that you get out of it. Just because some things, very few things do have their downsides. Why should you boycott everything? Why should you boycott this entire business of making things that are more resistant?
Let me just give you one example. As I said earlier, so far 2/3 of all the seed that has been genetically engineered has been designed to be resistant to particular herbicides or pesticides. Those pesticides or herbicides are sold by the same company that's designing the seed, so you lock into that level of contract farming, okay? They spray over the top of the crop rather than at the base of the crop. So they have had, as an example, for the Roundup Ready soybeans, Monsanto lobbied the Environmental Protection Agency to more than triple the safe and allowable parts per million of the active ingredient in the pesticide Roundup that it is impervious to, right? 350% higher levels than before. This pesticide, or this herbicide, is considered to be a significant factor in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, 350% more of that is going on the soybean that we're ingesting. I don't know that that's considered an advancement.
And there's a concept called nutraceutical, and the notion is, so what, you have this big ear that this young guy is describing, but it has no food value for us as human beings. So it doesn't matter if it's going to feed 50 more people, because in fact, it's not going to provide the same level of nutrition.
I just think it's important to realize that this fellow's question is maybe what 90 or 95% of the world is going to view. So I think it's a very important question. And the question I'd asked, I talked about which wheat. If we found, would the panel be opposed to a genetically engineered solution to the witchweed problem in Africa?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say that I would want to come up with one, within 6 months and implement it.
No. But I think his question is there a place where this kind of technology makes sense?
Well,
or is it like nuclear energy where it will never make sense?
I think Susan and I got into this at one point when we were talking about the pure versus applied science.
And I kind of feel more and more that, I used to think that surely there were applications where this would make sense. But the more I need to learn about, and I learned very little about the process,
that there's never a place where
Never.
there's any.
See, I'm not at never. I think we have to have an open mind to the possibility. What we need is to not have the people who control the process be the people who are going to profit from the process. So we need some other form of evaluation that can be for the public good.
I mean, like I said, I still use these techniques in research. I think they have a place in science, biotechnology. But what Bill just said, I'm going to say it a different way, is we don't have in place a truly democratic system where people can decide whether they want these things grown in commercial scale for profit. That is the issue here. That's where the safety and the risks and all these things happen.
I wonder if you could talk about how I've heard that the process by which one gene is spliced into another is a shuttle mechanism, is a pathogenic organism like a virus.
We're trying to listen to the speaker.
That there's actually viruses are used to move one gene into another. And for example, like leukemia is one that's used. And there are a couple other ones. Do you know anything about that and how? I know there's been concern raised about the process and how that can or might show up in the product. But that process is in and of itself suspect because you're using a disease organism to sneak in the gene of one plant or organism into this other organism, so it doesn't recognize it. So you kind of sneak it in, like where they use autoimmune kind of viruses, something like that. So you use the virus to introduce one gene into another. Do you know anything about that?
I mean, what you're saying is true. I don't know about the autoimmune stuff, but typically when you're introducing genes into another organism, it's part of this construction called a plasmid or a vector, which is a circular piece of DNA. It has your gene of interest on it, but in order to make that gene of interest operate in the other organism, you often use genetic elements from viruses or bacteria that in nature operate to replicate these things inside the other organism, or that function to insert that piece of DNA in the other organism. So there's a whole array of these things. Some of them are virus promoters. They're not the whole virus. They're what we call disarmed. But then again, I think something recently came up about one that's commonly used in plants, the promoter from the cauliflower mosaic virus. And I can't tell you what the controversy was about, but I think someone's taking a closer look at that again. If we have this kind of promoter, this thing that turns on your gene of interest from this cauliflower mosaic virus, what effect does that have on the other plants when you do? It's again, asking different kinds of questions that have never been asked before.
Yeah, I just want to say, I thought that young man's questions were really good. Not only do they show a different perspective that's probably the more of a majority perspective, but I think people who are cautious about this whole technology, we have to be clearer in responding to those kind of concerns. I mean, he was able to sit here and hear this whole thing, and yet those basic questions weren't really answered to his satisfaction. So I think we have to look at ways of responding to those concerns and questions really much more directly and clearer so people can really get it.
You know what? That is, that's where you get the situation of really needing to sit down one-on-one. Because, like I said, I struggled trying to figure out how I was going to introduce this after studying it immensely for 4 months now. You know, I agree with you. It's really important to have exchange that is respectful and depthful. I personally, after hearing the things that we had talked about, don't understand that he couldn't have heard at least that there were health risks and environmental risks. That's a little beyond me right now, to tell you the truth very honestly. But the fact of the matter is that there are also people, like I'm sure Sonia could have sat with him, or maybe Ingrid. One of the things that the best example that I've gotten yet about, from a layperson's perspective, about gene implantation is the analogy is a computer program. Implanting a code into a computer program, you cannot do that willy-nilly. You just can't. And then just sort of wait for 20 years for the results to show themselves, so then you know how the programs worked, you know. So there are ways of having that kind of direct exchange. And I agree, I think it's really important. It's also really important to be able to do that one-on-one, because I really honestly feel that his questions were coming from some basic levels, which we had already been addressing through the evening. So it's not pointing fingers or anything. It's just to say that
some level of the population, though, will require a Chernobyl or a 3 Mile Island before they're going to change their point of view, because their confidence in the way the system is working to their benefit historically and their observations says it's probably people are taking care of it. And so until that lift system breaks down in people because of that genetically engineered software, it's not going to change.
Exactly. And that's what I mean about the one-on-ones with someone like Sonia, who can sit down and really go like this for a long while with somebody who really needs to hear.
But in terms of maybe what you may be trying to do is create a grassroots movement, it's not effective to try to sit down one-on-one with everybody. You need to figure out ways to communicate through mass media more effectively, and you know, the soundbite mentality kind of thing.
Boy, yeah, I agree with you that that's really true. And I also am a person of words, so sound bites don't come easily to me. So that belongs to somebody else who can do cartoons and so forth. You know, really. I mean, there's a tremendous poster that rural Vermont received from an organization in Madison, Wisconsin, that is an American Gothic scene with a noose coming down. With that's what it is, American Gothic scene, a noose coming down. It's a woodblock print, and it says Monsanto, just say no. That's a soundbite. It's a visual soundbite, but it's a good one. You know, maybe it wouldn't have been for this gentleman, but it's a soundbite for a certain population. That's not my population, but I mean, that's not my, I don't do soundbites. But I think that one of the things that we all need to do in disseminating information on this issue is find out what we're good at, how we do it best, and start addressing at that level, you know? So, Bert's telling me it's time to wrap up because we have about 5 minutes left on the tape, I think. Yes?
I'll make it really short.
Yeah.
Everybody this time instead of trying to talk to the show man, who really, I don't mean to make excuses, he wasn't listening a lot of time during the program. I guess I say that as a teacher. He was talking a lot himself. But it does bring out, I think, some of the things, at least to me, were being spoken about. I think that we have a systemic confidence in progress, change, and technology that most of us don't question. And it's scary for people when we start questioning that. And I think that was part of the issue. And I also think that we have inherent in our society an anti-earth, anti-environment, anti-land structure. I mean, we've taken we've removed ourselves from the land. We've removed, our hands from out of the dirt. And a lot of people don't even think about that. And the other thing is that this is an overwhelming issue, and sometimes emotionally, people just can't deal with it if you throw it right in their face all at one time.
Yeah.
It is overwhelming.
I run into that feeling a lot from people, even friends I have in Europe. I respond to email, and a lot of young people are just kind of writing to me.
Yeah.
Like what they're doing.
Yeah.
Everyone will come to it as they can. Yeah, we need to finish up. Yeah.
This is just a local question. I mean, I was curious if anybody knew. I've seen new signs now, along the rows of corn that they're being planted this year that look kind of scary. And I thought, is this the first year that genetically engineered corn, for instance, is finding its way to Vermont? Does anybody know to what extent?
It's been around for several years. It's been on display at the fair for the last couple of years, at least. I think a lot of
yeah.
I'm sorry?
With the two-headed man.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, like I say, last year, I know they had this BT corn labeled, and here's conventional corn, and the conventional corn had wormholes all over it, you know, and there it was. This is a great promotion brought to you at the fair. Yeah, I think a lot of the corns you're seeing basically are advertisements. The signs, I'm sorry, you're seeing by the side of the road are advertisements for the North of King or Seaway or whatever variety it is, because you notice a number or a name or something like that underneath the brand, typically, and that basically tells the farmer something, or the seed rep something. You know, that looks like nice corn. I want to order that next year. That's why that's out there. It may or may not be BT. I don't know that 4329 is necessarily BT without looking at the catalog.
Do you know where the extension service, for instance, stands on this, or what is done?
Yeah, I'll pair that.
There's no records kept anywhere of who's planting what. So that's another issue as far as.
Oh, that's the seed sales service.
Right. The seed sales
Yeah, I'll tell you a
service.
story.
Well, so in order to do the gavel-to-gavel closure piece here, from having the film run from beginning to end, I think we need to end because it looks like we're almost out of film. So thank you very much, Bert, for filming. And thank you, everybody here, for staying and in the heat. I know it hasn't been so comfortable, but thanks a lot.